I was that crazy gold guy, and my wife said, please stop talking about that. We need friends in this town. You can see where they're going. I mean, they want to do all this crazy-ass shit. Something will happen, they'll declare an emergency. This revolution is going to allow us all to rethink what is the role of government. You try and save money, and you can't. They're stealing from you, as you point out.
But because people don't understand how inflation of money works, they can get away with it.
I think we are in an age of decentralization. And I mean, these nation states don't serve us anymore, right? It's fucking crazy. And it's corruption at the highest level. Now it's 80% of the country basically does not trust the government.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing? And I thought, well, who are the other 20%?
Wow.
They work for the government. Right?
One of my favorite sayings about money is that some people are so poor, all they have is money.
When you have fake money, you get fake morals, you get everything gets debased. And we know they lie to us. We know they protect themselves. We know they do whatever they can to keep their scheme going. We need to stop that. And the way to stop that is to...
That's a beautiful vision for the future.
It is a beautiful thing, isn't it? Right? I think we could actually make wars and nuclear weapons and all of that a thing of the past. Because I don't think the average man wants to kill other people. Holy shit.
Yeah.
That was the first time I actually realized how Hitler pulled it off.
The money itself is rooted in a lie.
I think it's a God-given thing that's a savior of mankind.
Get ready for more inflation.
Sadly,
right?
yes.
So hold things that cannot be printed.
Yes.
What does God mean to you then in the scope of all this struggle of good and evil? Like what?
Well,
hey everybody, welcome to the What is Money Show. I am thrilled to have you here joining me on my mission to help shine light on the corruption of money. Now, if this is your first time listening to the What is Money Show, I strongly recommend that you go back to episodes 1 through 9 first, which lays a lot of the groundwork for many of the concepts that we explore on the show. These first 9 episodes are my series with Michael Saylor, and thousands of people have told me that this is the best podcast series they've ever heard, hands down, and that it was instrumental to their understanding of money and Bitcoin. So if you're looking to start a deep dive into the nature of money, I don't think there's any place better that you can start other than episode 1 of this show. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. The What is Money Show is 100% sponsor based. So all of our revenues are derived from direct sponsorships. And I strive to be very selective about the sponsors that I work with, specifically only using sponsors that I use personally, and also choosing sponsors that have values which are well aligned to the values expressed on this show, such as freedom, education, self-sovereignty, etc. So what I'm going to do now is a few ad reads right at the top of the show, and then I'll do a few more ad reads in the middle. And I hope you'll take the time to listen to them, as again, these are hand-selected sponsors, and I think you'll like what they have to offer.
Today's podcast is brought to you by In Wolf's Clothing. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times per year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that help fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. So go to wolfnyc.com to learn more about the program or apply. Again, that's Wolf NYC, WOLFNYC.com. Larry Lepard.
Hey, Robert. Really nice to be with you. It's been too long.
It's been too long. Welcome back to the show.
Yeah.
I think last time we were together in person was in Miami back in 2021.
Yeah.
During the Bitcoin conference. So It's lovely to have you join me here in my home.
It's great. Thank you. Beautiful place. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I guess let's do a quick reintroduction for you. For those that may not know you, you've become quite a fan favorite in the Bitcoin space.
I don't know about
the past few years.
I'm just a squirrel looking for a nut. Background is an investor my entire career, venture capital from the early 80s until about 2005. Did well with the .com thing, had an internet address in 1993 and went all in there, and that did well economically on that. The bubble in 2000, I could see it, and I retired off it, and was managing my kids' sports team, sitting around, and the GFC happened, And it was a come to Jesus moment for me. And holy shit, everything's changed. They're going to print all this money. Yeah, I've got some savings, and I'll be, I thought I'd be okay for the rest of my life. No, I'm suddenly concerned that I won't be, because they're going to debase the currency massively. So big pivot. The white paper was written at the same time. Satoshi had the same reaction, dealt with it in a different way because he was a technologist. My reaction was, okay, what works when they print money? Gold. Studied it. In the 70s, gold and silver were the two best performing assets for the entire decade.
Right.
Gold was up 35% compounded. It went from $35 an ounce to $800 an ounce at the peak. So I pivoted and decided to become a manager of a gold fund, gold and gold stocks, got knowledgeable about those, et cetera, put all my money in, raised money, and I became a gold guy. Always kind of watching Bitcoin out of the corner of my eye, because there've been prior attempts, Hashcash and eCash and others, but sadly I got kind of thrown off the track in those early days, because I looked at it and I said, oh yeah, people have tried this and it didn't work.
Of course.
This was not going to work either.
Of course, yeah.
So I just, $1, $2, I heard Max talking about it. I was like, why bother? And then I was kind of interested in that. I got to go to a cafe and give somebody cash and get a paper wallet. It seemed hard. I was close to putting money into Mt. Gox, and they failed. And then when Coinbase came out, I said, okay, I get it. And so I started buying Coinbase. And so in 2013, I became a Bitcoiner. But to be frank, I still didn't fully understand the elegance and and my concern was always, is this technology going to work?
Yes.
That somebody's going to hack it.
Sure.
It's going to break.
Yeah.
You can't have digital money. It's just not going to work. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we all know now that was a misplaced fear. But even some of the core developers told me they were worried about it, and we had block wars and blah blah blah. So, but anyway, so now I still have. I'm carrying around that legacy gold fund. I've got to get all those guys out whole, and I will. Over time, I will transition all the way out of gold, but I think that time is measured in probably the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
And I became very big on Bitcoin. I believe it's superior to gold.
Yeah.
As a monetary savings technology, strongly so. It's outperformed it massively. But gold is not a zero. Gold, it's not going to be demonetized overnight.
Yeah.
Central banks are still betting on it. As I like to say, I think there are a few more puffs in the cigar of gold. And so, Bitcoin goes to 1 million, gold goes to 4,000. Obviously Bitcoin's outperformed, but, for older people, who some of my clients are, I can't say, hey, take your $10 million and put it in Bitcoin, and, you might have a 70% drawdown.
Sure.
And they're going to blow their brains out.
Yeah,
So I'm like,
yeah.
okay, you need some Bitcoin because it's got this massive upside.
Yeah.
You need some gold because it doesn't draw down more than 20% a year. And in general, it goes up 8% a year.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my background. So I view my role in this whole revolution as I'm the guy who's trying to convince the gold guys to get into Bitcoin because, and I got credibility, right? Because I am a gold guy and I was a gold guy.
Yeah.
So I go to gold conferences and I give speeches like, hey, yeah, this stuff's great, guys, but you also got to pay attention to this.
Right.
And gold guys are our friends. They generally, they get the fundamental Austrian case for sound money.
Of course.
They just got the wrong solution.
Sure.
They've got the older solution, right?
Yeah, and in their defense, they had the right solution.
Until 08, for sure.
Yeah, well, even when Bitcoin came out, as you said, it takes a long time for it to get to that point of, is Bitcoin going to survive?
Right.
I think many people would think we've passed that threshold at this point, but it's still probabilistic, right? Who knows?
It's very low chance, right?
And also in their defense, like, this is a generational thing, right? If you are an older guy, it's a little bit harder to get your head around digital sound money.
Correct.
Whereas gold has been working for 5,000 plus years.
Right. And you can touch it and feel it. And I think the other thing that threw gold people off the Bitcoin scent was all the shit coinery and all the bullshit.
Yes.
And I can't tell you how many gold guys are saying, that's Sam Bankman-Fried.
Yes.
Fuck that shit. I'm not going to do that. Right? And so sadly, the shit coiners have done a big disservice to the Bitcoin case.
Yeah, so I think I'm ambivalent on this actually, because I agree, reputation-wise, crypto and Bitcoin getting commingled is a huge problem, right? People think, FTX is Bitcoin, is crypto.
Right.
Like they just mix it all up.
Right.
But from a regulatory standpoint, it's created kind of a smokescreen around Bitcoin.
Right.
The regulators have been chasing down all of these infinite scams that sort of just let Bitcoin grow.
Right.
To the point where now it seems like it's impossible to take down.
Yeah, I think it's too late. Although we'll talk about what they might do when they get really threatened in the future.
Sure. So I want to talk a little bit more about your path to becoming a gold bug, because you really you being a gold bug is what led you to become a Bitcoiner,
Correct.
it sounds like. And I think this is, I mean, in my understanding of money, and again, I read The Creature from Jekyll Island pre-Bitcoin, I was missing kind of the Austrian economic piece, which I didn't get until post-Bitcoin, but understanding the importance of gold, specifically the properties of gold that made it good money, sets you up really nicely to understand the properties of Bitcoin as good money. So was it 2008 great financial
I was a
crisis
gold bug.
that
I was a gold bug before that.
Okay.
You know, so I read The Creature from Jekyll Island in the 80s,
Okay.
and I was going to Ron Paul things, you know, forever, and was watching him, you know, quiz Bernanke, and I was, you know, in the early 2000s. And you know, I went to college and took an economics degree and was taught Keynesianism.
Yes.
And I immediately said, this isn't right. This just doesn't foot
Yes. Yeah.
with how the world works.
Yeah.
And so I always kind of knew that we were living, and I studied the 70s very carefully.
Yeah.
And my grandfather was a gold bug, and you know, he held gold, and we watched the massive inflation event in the 70s, and I kind of knew that the system was flawed all the way through. But to be frank, the gold didn't work particularly well from 1980 until kind of 2000.
Right.
Because, you know, they kind of put it back in the can, and, you know, there was a lot of credit growth, there was a lot of technological development, et cetera. And so, you know, it wasn't necessarily a profitable investment in that time frame when everything else was growing. And you know, there's another piece that's not talked about a lot, but that is a fact, and that is the government very effectively figured out how to defang and demonetize gold.
Oh yeah,
to their own benefit.
They suppress it in the paper markets.
I mean, they realized very clearly that if the price of gold goes up, that means that they are mismanaging their currency, and the value of their currency goes down.
Right.
And so guys like Robert Rubin and Larry Summers and a number of other people, the list too long to elaborate on, figured out schemes to keep the price of gold down by issuing paper gold contracts.
Yeah.
So, that all existed long before Bitcoin came along, and you know, and I was a lone Austrian economist, and a lot of people thought I was nuts, and you know, I was that crazy gold guy, and my wife said, "Please stop talking about that. We need friends in this town. Don't push the gold narrative." Blah,
Sounds
blah,
like
blah.
the wives of Bitcoiners today.
Yeah, exactly. You know, well, imagine. I mean, at least she kind of got gold. Then I said, "Hey, this is better. This is digital gold." She's like, "Oh, Christ, here we go again. This is even worse. You know, you're really nuts." But you know, to me, I've said this in other podcasts. It's really true. When Bitcoin came along, and when Safe wrote the Bitcoin Standard, which truly I think is going to be one of the most historic books ever written.
Yeah,
I really do. I think
agreed.
Safe is going to be in there with von Mises and Rothbard and all those guys. And you know, suddenly I've got 20 and 30-year-olds quoting Austrian economists to me, and I'm like, this is fucking great.
Yes.
I've got reinforcements. You know? We've been fighting. I mean, gold is sound money, and gold was sound money until Bitcoin came along. But you know, to be honest with you, we were a real minority, and it was a real fringe group of guys that were gold bugs.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, thanks to Saifedean for writing that book. That's what gave me that gap I was missing. I didn't have the Austrian economics piece to complete the picture here, but definitely sucked me into the Austrian economics rabbit hole.
Right.
So what? Okay, and then being a gold bug for decades, up until the great financial crisis.
But a radical gold bug post 08. Yeah.
Right, radical post 08 because you saw the $700 billion we printed.
TARP, right.
Which doesn't sound like much money today. It's weird.
Isn't it amazing?
It's like that number is...
Well, we just had a $600 billion federal deficit this quarter. Just got reported last night.
This quarter.
Yeah.
So that's basically money that's getting printed this quarter.
Right.
Yeah. That's another thing. Yeah, the people, these terms, it's always the jargon that makes things complicated.
Right.
But when you say a $600 billion deficit, you're basically saying a $600 billion loss.
Correct.
Right? The government is spending $600 billion more than it's bringing in.
Yes.
And that loss can only be covered with money printing.
With printing money because they don't have it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this giant historic bailout package in 2008 of $700 billion is now just a quarterly loss for the U.S. government.
Yeah. And growing. By the way, that 600 was up from 500.
Yes.
Prior
growing,
quarter.
Of course. So what was your transition then, and you'd been a gold bug for decades. You understood the value of gold as sound money.
Yeah.
How did you shift? How did you take that frame of understanding on gold and apply it to Bitcoin? Like, what did it? Was it an impediment to understanding Bitcoin? Did it help you?
No, it helped. It was really a big positive. I mean, so as Safe points out in his book, because he does a nice comparison of gold to silver.
Yeah.
You know, the best monies have the lowest flow to stock, or the highest stock to the lowest flow.
Yes.
In other words, the supply is constrained.
They inflate the least.
They inflate the least,
Yeah,
right? I mean, you know, look, gold does inflate. I mean, we you know, it grows. The supply of gold in the world grows at about 1.7% a year. In 40 years, we will have twice as much gold as we have today. And you know, looking back 40 years, we have twice as much as we had 40 years ago. So gold is inflating because we have gold mines that produce new gold. So that's the stock to flow ratio of gold, which, by the way, is equal right now to the Bitcoin issuance. You know, but
for another week.
For another week, exactly, until the halving when it gets cut in half. And so that was kind of the first thing I said. Well, this is sounder because it will soon have a lower stock to flow, and in fact, it's even better than that because ultimately it will have no stock to flow. As Saylor points out, in 2034, 99% of it will have been issued. Yeah. The stock to flow will become truly trivial because I think it takes 100 years to issue the remaining 1%.
That's right.
So, you know, there is no stock. There is really no, I mean, there is no flow almost, right? And so that's the first characteristic of a sound money. You know, the other is it verifiable, et cetera. And, you know, as we all know, the U.S. says they have 261 million ounces of gold in Fort Knox. Do they? I don't know.
Hasn't been looked at since 1954
or something, right? And they, you know what they claim? They claim it's too expensive to audit it. Give me a break. I mean, with all the billions of dollars they're spending, they're perfectly capable of auditing that gold if they wanted to. And so again, it's a little bit of a peas and shells game, which goes along with the paper gold. So.
Yeah, so this is very important, right? The stock to flow ratio, which is basically the inverse of the inflation rate.
Correct.
The money or the monetary technology with the highest stock to flow ratio, which is the same thing as saying the money with the lowest inflation rate.
Correct.
Tends to be favored as the best money on the free market.
Correct.
And there's an intuitive understanding of this, right? It's like if you're going to hold your wealth in something, you would prefer to hold it in something that is not going to be printed or produced arbitrarily by others, because if they can print it or produce it, then they will siphon off your purchasing power, right? And I always use the Babe Ruth rookie baseball card analogy, right? If there were 100 Babe Ruth rookie baseball cards, and each one's worth, I don't know, $1,000. So there's a $100,000 market cap in that pool of Babe Ruth rookie baseball cards. But if someone starts discovering the 101st, the 102nd, so on and so forth.
If we know they're printing a couple every year.
Exactly. That pool gets diluted. Correct. And so the purchasing power or value or price of each baseball card goes down.
It's like watering the beer. I mean, and this is why, as Saylor points out, this is why, you know, beachfront property, waterfront property, there's only so much of it in the world. Is another good asset, another asset that cannot be replicated.
Yes,
you know,
absolute scarcity.
Absolute scarcity. Yeah.
And the other thing so here's maybe gets a little deeper. The stock to flow ratio is necessary and telling for commodity monies, right? Because we don't really know the total supply of gold or silver or anything, right? So the best we can say is here's the current supply divided by the current new supply coming online.
Correct.
And the higher that ratio, the better the money is as a savings vehicle.
That's right.
Bitcoin's different though, right? Because we know the stock to flow ratio today. Yeah. We know what the stock to flow ratio will be in 4 years, 8 years, 10 years, 100 years. Yeah. It's like we, for the first time in history, we have perfect information about the money supply and how the money supply will change over time.
And you can't lie about those coins. We can see them all on the chain. This goes back to do we have the 261? Does China have what they say they have? Does Russia have what they say they have? Yeah. The triple entry accounting, the ability to see it is an enormously valuable attribute of this sound digital money.
Can you expand on that? Triple entry accounting. What does that mean?
If you think about accounting, there was a big development in Italy, you know, when they started doing double entry accounting, you know, debits and credits and keeping score, and they shifted to Arabic numerals as opposed to you know, what they were using for the Roman numerals before. And it allowed businesses to keep score of, debits, credits, revenues, costs, and, profit. The triple entry is, you've got a debit, you've got a credit, and then you've got a entry on a public ledger so that everyone can see it. So if you and I have a debt between ourselves, we just have that. Nobody knows about it. Nobody can prove it. Nobody can verify it. But if we have a debt between ourselves and it's recorded publicly and you can get on the internet and see it,
timestamp.
That's the timestamp.
Yep.
That's the triple entry.
Yes.
Right? And that's a huge, huge change, a big innovation.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Double entry. I think it was the Medicis maybe that started doing this.
Yeah,
but
the bankers. Yeah, in Florence.
There was not a common language of accountancy prior to double entry bookkeeping.
Right.
But double entry bookkeeping became basically the language of business. Really, that's what we call accounting today. That's what I went to school for. That's what you learn. The first thing you learn.
Right.
T accounts, debits, credits.
Yeah, exactly. Everything's got a balance.
How to make a balance sheet balance. Yeah, exactly. Revenues minus expenses equals net income.
Right.
Assets equals liabilities plus equities.
Yep.
All of these things. So that all started with double entry bookkeeping. But to your point, double entry bookkeeping works between counterparties, right?
Correct.
Like your balance sheet
You have to trust
balances.
each other.
Exactly.
I mean, you can lie about it.
But now if you are able to, I guess, externalize those commercial relationships and publicly represent them and publicly timestamp them.
Well, and verify them with 30,000 nodes.
Yes.
Right? So that everyone knows that transaction occurred. There's no doubt about it. It's absolute dead-ass mathematical certainty that it took place. Right?
Yes. And there's that old saying that sunlight is the best disinfectant, right?
Correct.
So all of the shenanigans and fraud and systemic risk that can accumulate between these trusted counterparty transactions,
people who can lie,
right, can now be brought into the sunlight and prevented. And that's
it's a big deal.
Yes, and this is obviously this is tricky because Bitcoin has kind of made this trade-off. For it needs this level of transparency to certify its fixed money supply. But so it makes the trade-off of privacy to some extent, right?
It does.
The
It
Bitcoin,
does. I mean, fortunately, the address is just pseudonymous, so you don't know who's what address.
That's right.
But yes, I mean, there's a transaction record of every single thing that's occurred in this currency.
Right.
And there always will be.
Yeah. So it is fundamentally different, right? Because we didn't see that, with gold transactions, there's no public record of what gold has changed hands.
Nope, none of that.
But it's a necessary trade-off to get that perfect fixed money supply.
Correct.
That makes it the perfect savings technology, basically. That no one can debase it arbitrarily. Yeah. The supply is known, right? It's 21
Another
million.
way of saying the same thing that I think is really very powerful and important to understand is that if you think Bitcoin is a commodity, and one coin's the same as the next, they are all the same. There are 21 million of them. Although they say they're rare or they're rare sats. I'm not a big fan of rare sats, but whatever. To me, a sat's a sat.
Yeah.
If you look at all other commodities in the world, gold, wheat, oil, sugar, you name it, any commodity, the laws, the way the world works is such that you say, I'm going to push the price of this up. Well, guess what? Producers are going to respond and make more of it.
Yes, exactly.
High oil price, drill for more oil.
Yes.
High gold price, open more gold mines. High sugar price, plant more sugar cane. Okay. This is the only commodity. This is what's so unique about it. It's the only commodity in the world where the price doesn't matter. There are 21 million, algorithmically programmed, never changing.
Yeah.
So the price can be 100,000, it can be 1 million, it can be 10 million.
Right.
I think it will be all of those things over time.
That's right.
And yet there's no supply change.
That's right.
So it's really, I think the difficulty, and this is why Saylor says all your models are broken. The difficulty a lot of people have in getting their heads around this thing is they've never really seen anything like this before.
That's right. Yeah.
It'd be like, try to explain to, somebody who's never seen fire what fire is. Or
of course.
Just take any basic technology. You take a primitive and you show them an automobile and they'd be like, what the hell is that?
Yes. Yeah. And it really, it's very deep because what we're saying is all commodities are relative, basically. And in Bitcoin, we've discovered something that is an absolute, right? It does not change. So as the price of gold or any other commodity goes up, there's a release. As the demand for this commodity goes up, there's kind of a release valve, right? The price can go up, but the price going up will also incentivize new production to come online to satisfy that demand.
Correct.
So the price doesn't fully express the increase in demand. Some of it is expressed through an increase in production.
Correct.
But Bitcoin it's an absolutely fixed line of production. It doesn't change whatsoever. So any changes in demand are purely expressed in terms of price.
Correct.
And that's why it's been.
And we've never seen anything like it. I mean, that's why there has never been a financial asset that's appreciated the way this thing has in 15 years. Ever.
Yes.
It's a unique event.
Yeah. Fastest growing asset in human history, as far as I know.
Yep.
And then obviously the best performing asset since it's been around. Right. So.
And 5 years and 10 years too.
Yeah.
I mean, you can look at some 1 and 2 year periods where it underperforms because you have corrections and there's
right. So what do you? I mean, the other thing about gold that I don't think a lot of people understand is that historically it was a check, right? If a government were printing too much money, or a government were otherwise behaving irresponsibly towards its citizens, well, people could withdraw gold from the banks,
correct,
and exit, right? So they could vote with their feet in a very serious way, in a way that is very high signal.
Yep.
When we eliminate the redeemability of currency for gold, not only do we eliminate that ability for people to vote with their feet or vote with their wallet, if you will, but you've now also authorized the government to just print money ad infinitum. So you get the government can just grow forever, right? There's no check.
Well, and that's what, if you look at any of the charts of what happened to the money supply or inflation or anything else post 1971.
Yeah.
I mean, which, it was really a soft gold standard because you couldn't, as a U.S. citizen, you couldn't take your dollars in and exchange them for gold. But if you're a foreigner, you could.
Yeah.
And in fact, the French trying to do that was what led Nixon to breaking the deal, reneging on the deal.
Yeah.
Or as Saylor likes to say, in 1971, Nixon killed all the hostages.
Yeah.
I love that saying.
Yeah.
The governments have, since that time, governments have behaved in an increasingly irresponsible manner. And so the average human being who's unaware of that has been kind of, in my opinion, ravaged by inflation.
Of course.
You try and save money and you can't.
Right.
Because, you save it and every year it devalues. They're stealing from you, as you point out.
Yes. So okay, is that what you're saying there? Since going off the gold standard, governments have behaved increasingly recklessly.
In my opinion, yes.
Is that just a direct consequence of the incentives change, right? If you behave recklessly before, well, people take the gold out and they leave your country and all of a sudden you don't have a tax base.
Correct.
But in a world where you can't take the gold out, then the government has no incentive to care what you think, right?
I think that's right. I mean, I think that's right. I think the government, and by the way, it gives the government power. It gives them power to spend on wars. It gives them power to run things the way they want to do. It allows, the politicians to benefit, allows the military-industrial complex to benefit. For some people, it allows quintillionaires to benefit.
Yes.
Because, they generally speaking have a way of operating, in a low interest rate environment. And they get the money first.
Yes.
The government's printing money, and the person who gets it first is at a significant advantage over Joe Sixpack, who gets paid his wage. And by the time he goes to buy things, the prices are higher.
Right. So this is an inherently corrupt system in which the rich steal from the poor
and
via the printing of money.
And notably getting progressively worse,
of course,
in a compound fashion.
How could it not?
Yeah, how could it not? And here we are, where it's kind of like, light is dawning on Marblehead. I mean, everybody is starting to realize. I mean, I don't think the average normal person in the U.S. necessarily knows it's the Federal Reserve and the money printing that's causing them pain. But there's probably nobody in this country that isn't feeling pain from inflation.
Of course.
I mean, unless you're a gazillionaire and you don't give a shit.
Yeah.
But every family in this country is strained as a result of the inflation that we've suffered through, and it's getting worse.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. What then? How does Bitcoin fit into this then? So we're saying that the redeemability of gold, right? So that people used to be able to exchange currency for gold.
Yeah.
This was a way to cast a vote of no confidence on the local government, which incentivized the government to be responsible and accountable to the preferences of their citizens.
Right.
When that is removed, you get fiat clown world that we're 50 years into today.
Yeah.
How does Bitcoin restore balance to the force?
Well, it gives power back to the citizens. I mean, it's sovereign money for an individual that the government can't control or confiscate. And They may want to, but if you've got your 12 words, your 24 words, subject unless they torture you or threaten to throw you in jail, they can't steal your money, and through the theft of inflation. So that's really the primary use case. I mean, store of value. Clean digital property is what Bitcoin is, and it's the first of its kind. And it's the leading one, and I don't see it ever being, supplanted or replaced. And so, this is a way for an individual to protect themselves from consistent monetary debasement. It's actually a bit more than that, though, too, because it's got that quantity, which will be very valuable as the government continues to behave irresponsibly. Lay over that, it's also got an adoption curve, right? Which is a beautiful thing. Which is to say, there are 8 billion people. 21 million Bitcoins. I mean, there are 54 million millionaires and 21 million. Every millionaire in the world can't even have half a coin.
Right.
So if you have half a coin today, you're by definition at least a millionaire.
Yeah.
Okay. In future purchasing power terms, right? Yeah. And more realistically, maybe a couple 100 million people have some Bitcoin today and realize it's a superior form of money. The other 8 billion are going to come to that conclusion. And as they do, they're going to want some, and they're going to pay you more for what you already hold.
Right.
So it's a little bit of a, get in early and beat the rush.
Yeah.
Kind of approach to the problem. And so this adoption curve, in my opinion, is going to take it from today's price to multiples of today's price. I mean, it's, if you kind of look at it historically, it's kind of tended to do a power law or to go to the 10th power. Every 6-7 years, something like that. So it was, $700, and it was $7,000. Now it's $70,000. I mean, I fully expect that, 10 years from now it'll be $700,000, and 10 years after that'll be $7 million. Yeah. I mean, and it could actually even go faster, because I also think we're a little bit close to the tipping point, to the, where everyone's becoming aware of it.
Yes.
And when that happens, it could go quite quickly, in my opinion.
Yes. There's the possibility of more people becoming aware of it, and then you just switch to the best tool for the job, basically.
Well, that's right.
But then there's the other force pushing the same direction, but from a different perspective, is that the currency's failing, right?
That's right.
So as people have to rush out of the dollar, it's like, well, where do you go?
Well, that's right too.
Yeah,
exactly. You've got two forces, just adoption of a better thing, but misbehavior on the part of the governments, which is getting just progressively worse, and very, very obviously so.
Yes.
If you look at the charts.
So one of the things that really boggles my mind is this is all pretty complicated stuff, right? Like thinking about the nature of money, how the financial system works, how economics works. I think, as Mises says, economics is like the youngest science, right? It was only less than 200 years ago we figured out that value is subjective, for instance.
Correct.
So we're early on into this enterprise of economic science.
Well, and it's a little bit squishy too, because it's based on human behavior. It's not based on physics.
Exactly.
The economics
exactly.
In general.
It's a rationalistic science versus an empirical science.
Exactly.
And so
this isn't chemistry.
Right. So not only is it a young science, but you have to, the things, we mostly think of empiricism as science.
Correct.
But that's not true for mathematics. It's not true for logic. It's not true for economics, right? These are rationalistic. So it's a whole, you have to switch your entire understanding of what science is for most modern people.
Correct.
To start to grok economics and then grok money, Bitcoin, et cetera. Given that context, one of the things that boggles my mind is that we seem to be stuck forever in this need to explain inflation.
Yeah.
Right, like I'm always tempted to say it's obvious, or it's like, okay, if someone's printing money and you can't print it, then it's obvious that they're stealing from you, right? Because the money is a representation or the means you use to acquire goods and services. It's not the good or service itself.
Correct.
So if someone can print new representations of the good or service or the means to acquire the good or service, and you cannot print it, well, they're going to debase your purchasing power, which is your ability to acquire goods and services.
Yeah, I mean, wealth is really the goods and services. I mean, food is wealth, oil is wealth, labor is wealth. I mean, that's, that's what we all want. I mean, we only hold money because we know that we can exchange it in the future for something that we want.
Means to an end.
It's a means to an end.
Yeah.
And so there's a fixed supply. I mean, well, it's not entirely fixed because it grows with productivity and population growth, but there is a supply that's relatively fixed compared to the growth in the money of these goods and services, right? I mean, we're not going to just suddenly find all kinds of new productivity and just invent new oil wells, et cetera. I mean, you have to invest and so forth. And, so the paper, the money is the claim against those.
Right.
And it's pretty simple. I mean, if you took the money supply as an example and doubled it, then everyone would have twice as much money and evenly distributed.
It's a stock split.
A stock split, and suddenly everything would cost twice as much.
Right.
And because the supply and demand would balance at a new higher price.
Yeah.
And so, some people don't get that, but that's what's been going on. And you look at the COVID inflation shock. I mean, it kind of matches. I mean, the M2 went up about 40%.
Right.
And that's kind of what the price levels have gone up.
Of course.
Actually, the stated price levels, the reported price levels have gone up less than that, but that's because they cook those numbers too.
Of course.
But I think what you and I have observed, I know what I've observed, is that my life feels about 40% more expensive than it was in 2019.
My life feels more than that. I mean,
Even more?
I'm a big beef eater.
Okay.
And the cost of beef has tripled.
Okay, fair enough.
Pretty much in 4 years.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, it depends on the category and so forth. But
of course.
Yeah.
So how do we demystify inflation in a way that can just land with the general consciousness once and for all? Because there's still, it seems like this slightly, the slight ambiguity that's left there leaves room for Keynesians and statists and Joe Biden to go on Super Bowl commercials and be like, oh, I love ice cream and I don't like that ice cream's getting more expensive. These ice cream producers need to lower their prices. Like, they can still say these blatantly deceptive bullshit lines, but because people don't understand how inflation and money works, they can get away with it. So like, is there a way to just crush this and be like, guys, inflation stuff, pure and simple?
Yeah. I think one, don't write off all the country for buying their bullshit.
Sure.
I think half the country doesn't buy it, but some of the country does, and for sure. To be frank, I mean, my view is, and it's rather sad, but my view is that when we have a very serious inflation event, maybe even going so far as hyperinflation, I've been told not to use that word by some high-level people in this whole space, but we could go there. When we have that kind of event, I mean, I think people are going to realize that it didn't just happen out of the blue. I mean, it wasn't ex nihilo that we just, we had inflation. Well, no, the government did this to you. And the thing is, I mean, it's interesting because Americans are sheltered, right? The last inflation we had was, the Continental in 1789. Okay. We had a little bit of inflation with the greenback and the Civil War, but, we've had a relatively stable currency. You know who gets this are people from other countries.
Of course.
You travel, particularly in South America, but I mean, Hungary and
the global South,
Russia,
really.
And really anywhere in the world. And they understand. I mean, the Chinese understand. They had hyperinflation, several of them. So, it's Americans who are kind of sheltered and kind of have had a relatively calm monetary existence and who, until recently, generally speaking, trusted their government. I mean, I'm writing my quarterly report now. One of the charts I have in there, which I think is a really fabulous chart, is that now it's 80% of the country does not trust the government, basically does not trust the government.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing? And I thought, well, who are the other 20%?
Wow.
They work for the government. Right? So
that's
isn't that interesting? It's a
Okay.
great chart. I pulled it out of the Wall Street Journal. So it's, I think it's fairly authoritative.
That's excellent because what's that old saying that no man is better than his incentives?
Correct. Or it's hard to get a man to to believe in something if it goes against what gets him paid.
Exactly.
And that's why the government.
Exactly.
If you're on the government dole and you're getting paid by the government, well, the government's okay.
Yeah, and it sort of emphasizes something that Jeff Booth has said, that money is superordinate to law. Right.
Yes.
That money is the primary social agreement or social contract. It's superordinate to government. Right. That's why the government imposes taxation and prints the money.
Correct.
It's a business like every other human organization.
Absolutely.
There's no moral superiority. There's no. They don't have your best interest in mind. Like it is a for-profit, self-interested business, just like every other business on the planet. And so I think it's a problem that we even use terms like deficit spending rather than this company's running at a loss, right? They're spending money they don't have.
Yeah.
It's like we try to treat government like it's a different animal.
Yeah. If the government were a company, it would be in deep shit.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be bankrupt.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, yeah.
It's already, that's a great segue to a question I wanted to ask you about your pinned tweet.
Okay.
So your pinned tweet, I mean, we've probably already spent an hour talking about all of this and how complex it is, but your pinned tweet really crystallizes it down into one picture. One sentence.
Yeah, it's on Twitter.
And it's a time series chart spanning from roughly 1940 to 2020.
Yeah.
And it shows US GDP as the blue line and total US debt. I think this is just private
it's total
debt.
It's all debt.
Total debt.
Government and private, all of it.
Public and private as the red line.
Yes.
And around 1971, for some reason,
they diverge.
I wonder what happened there.
Yeah.
The red line starts to exponentially outstrip the blue line, right? The blue line's just growing and the red line's just basically going parabolic.
Correct.
Getting much higher than it. And around, the chart stops around 2020, and it appeared to me that...
It continues. I need to update the chart, and I will, but it's,
It appeared to me that GDP around this time, again, around 2020, was just over 20 trillion. So this is...
I think it's 23 or 4 now, something like that.
Yeah, this is the annual output of goods and services in the U.S., right?
Right.
The total debt is north of 70 trillion.
And now it's north of 90.
And now it's north of 90. So, and your tweet reads, blue line, which is U.S. GDP, generates income to pay interest on the red line, which is total debt. See the problem? It's just math.
Correct.
Like we are to the point of the U.S. government being bankrupt. It is bankrupt. It is currently insolvent.
Yes.
There's no hiding it. I mean, what?
This is Keynesianism.
Yeah, this is Keynesian. So what is it then that is allowing this... Well, I don't know, what do we call this? This insolvent organization of the U.S. government. How is it able to continue, whereas any private business in these financial circumstances would clearly be wiped out? How is this thing? This game
they control the money printer. That's the bottom line. They control the money printer. So this business. Imagine if you had a business that was losing money, but in the back room they had a printer that could print the loss and just cover it up. And force the loss to be taken by all of the holders of the money in the form of what I call watering the beer. It's like, okay, yeah, you've got $1 million, but you know what? It only buys $800,000 worth of stuff now because we just increased the money supply by 20%.
Right.
I mean, that's the simple math. The mistake that Keynes and Keynesian guys made is the thought that what this world really depends upon is growth, and that growth is good, and he used the term animal spirits, and what they were all reacting to was that we had a bubble fueled by the Federal Reserve in 1929 that led to a collapse, that led to a real calamity, a deflationary calamity, and they had a hard time getting out of that, and Roosevelt grabbed the gold, a million things happened, and they came to the conclusion that deflation was evil and bad. And deflation is not evil and bad. Deflation means your money buys more over time. We had good deflation throughout the entire 19th century. I mean, wages, the price of cigars, all this stuff didn't...
Purchasing power going up is deflation. Purchasing power going down is inflation.
Correct. Yes. And so wages maybe were flat in some cases, in some jobs in the 1800s, but things got cheaper because of productivity and efficiency.
Right.
And that's the way the world should work, and that's what Jeff Booth talks about in his book, and it's brilliant. The Keynesians came along and said, well, we don't ever want to have that deflation again, so we got to wire the system to always grow. And the way we do that is we hold the price of money artificially low, and we incentivize people to get into debt. And by getting into debt, then they have to keep running like a hamster on a treadmill, and so they're going to grow, the debt level. But the income level is not going to grow equivalently. And at some point, that chart that I pinned as my tweet is what I call the perfect example of Stein's law. Herbert Stein was the economist in the Nixon administration who said, if something cannot go on forever, it will end. It's a pretty simple law, right? I mean, I love it.
Almost by definition.
It's pretty fucking basic, right? The tricky part is that when you have a money printer, you can delay the point at which it will end.
Yes.
And there's, to be honest, my grandfather thought it was going to end in 1971.
Right.
When we went off the gold standard.
Yeah.
And we had a big boost of inflation.
Right.
And I remember in 79 and 80, there was talk that the dollar was going to fail. There really was.
Yes.
The gold had gone from 35 to 800 and everyone was panicked.
Yes.
Okay. Volcker came in, they put huge real rates up, they got it all under control. They put the menace back in the can for a while. We got a bunch of good decades, but they didn't solve the underlying problem, which is that Keynesians use debt to try to generate growth.
Right.
And it's like most things.
The tail wagging the dog.
Yeah, and a little bit of debt used in the right way is actually a productive thing, because if you're doing it to, build a well and then people have cheap water and they live better lives. And I mean, that's productive debt where you get a return on it and the return exceeds the value of the cost or the cost of taking it on. But what happens over time is you forget about that part and you just figure, let's borrow and spend.
Right.
And it just gets worse and worse and worse. And we're now at the point where, the long run, I mean, Keynes said something that I consider to be, I think Keynes was a very evil guy. I mean, he was a British elite. He was a pedophile. He was just a piece of shit. And he said something that I thought, any Christian would just abhor. And that he said, well, it doesn't matter because in the long run, we're all dead.
Yeah.
Which is a way of saying, we could screw the shit out of our kids. Who gives a fuck? We're all going to die and we don't care. So therefore, we can do this unsound thing because in the long run, we're all dead. I mean, what an evil piece of shit. And yet we all worship, American economists worship Keynesian economics.
Yes.
And it's fundamentally flawed. What we should be trying to achieve is not, so again, they were trying to achieve growth. To get growth, they used debt, and that was kind of the model. That's not the model that we should be using. The model we should be using is we want efficiency.
Yeah.
Okay. We don't want net growth. We don't want bigger numbers. We want to get more for less.
Yes. More,
that's called a productivity increase.
Yes.
Right? If you're milling cotton and you got people picking out the seeds by hand, that takes a lot of human labor, and that's why we had slaves.
Yeah.
Okay? You're Eli Whitney, you come along, you invent a cotton gin, you can feed this thing through and you can do 10x the volume.
Yes.
And now you've got, that's improvement. That's productivity improvement.
Yes.
That didn't have anything to do with the growth of the money. You didn't need that. You made things better.
Right.
And so that's really what we need is we need a more efficient system. And to get a more efficient system, it's incredibly important that the inputs are right.
Yeah.
And the inputs involve what's the cost of capital. And the cost of capital is the interest rate.
Yes.
And so if you fuck with the interest rate
Right.
and you hold it at zero and you say there is no cost of capital,
Right.
you get malinvestment. And this is classic Austrian theory.
Price fixing.
Yeah, it's price fixing.
Yeah.
And the money goes to areas where it's not generating increased productivity.
Yes.
And the world is full of that. And we've got all these bubbles of just bullshit that we've invested in, ESG, all kinds of crap that don't make sense, that in a sound money environment would not be financeable and would not occur.
Exactly.
And so that's, that's kind of my 5-second rant on why Keynesianism is just evil and broken and why we need to return to a sound money system.
Yeah, and a great rant explaining the causal pathway by which we go from fake money to fake food to fake news to fake everything. Like you debase the quality of the money, the purchasing power of the money. You by extension start to debase the quality of all goods and services.
Yeah, there's a great guy in Switzerland, Tony Debin. People should Google it and look at the old YouTube of him talking about how, when you have fiat money, when you have fake money, you get fake morals, you get fake. I mean, everything gets debased. And I mean, a perfect example of this is, the debauchery in Weimar Germany in the 1920, 21, 22 period as the money was failing. Everyone just takes a live for today attitude.
Yeah.
I mean, this is why
they also had the gender fluidity thing going on, which we have that going on today.
Yeah,
was that a coincidence?
Well, yeah, right. And the lottery. I mean, people entertain themselves with bread and circuses. I mean, all they care about is going to the Taylor Swift concert or watching this game or that game. Yeah. I mean, they're not focused on what's really important in terms of improving the quality of their lives.
Yes,
which is to say, doing effective and efficient things. And then, by the way, knowing that they've got savings that they can enjoy. I think one of the biggest evils of Keynesianism is the way that when the money is being debased, nobody can theoretically retire safely. And a great story I know, a guy who's my age, 66, has a good job, has a house that's paid off, has $2 million of savings. So he's done fine by almost anyone's standards, right? And he says to himself, I can't retire. The reason I can't retire is I might live another 30 years, and I don't know if 2 million is enough to get me through that. And that's sad.
Yeah.
And because if gasoline's $50 a gallon, 2 million isn't going to be enough.
Right.
But
this is a guy basically in the top 1% of global wealth.
I was going to say
top 5% US
right,
probably. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. I mean, it's like, and that to me is the evil of the system that we currently have. I mean, one ought to be able to use their labor to accumulate wealth, knowing that wealth will be intact, and then allow them to give back to society, help their grandkids, whatever, right? And that's gone. You can't do that in the system.
And so again, in an attempt to try to demystify some of this Keynesian nonsense and probably tie this into your last story there, money comes into existence when we produce more than we consume.
Correct.
Right? That's literally what you do when you go to work. You produce something, a good or service, and you're paid money.
Yes.
And now that money is potential consumption, right? You can take that into the market and consume goods or services with that money.
That somebody else produced.
Exactly. Now, if you don't consume that money and you hold it in savings, well, then what has the economy received? The economy has received your production of goods and services without you consuming anything back from it.
Correct.
Right? So you have a claim on the market that you have not exercised yet.
That's right.
So when Keynesian, under the philosophy of Keynesianism, they often say they produce money out of thin air, right? As you were describing earlier, the idea, and this is an exact inversion of economic reality, is that, well, when there's an economic recession, that we need to stimulate consumption through the printing of money to then encourage more production.
Correct.
Of course, economic reality is that you cannot consume what has not yet been produced.
Correct.
So production must precede consumption, not the opposite.
Right.
Now, when you print money out of thin air, again, as we said earlier, money comes into existence when you produce more than has been consumed. Right. So obviously, when you produce money and no production has occurred, it's eating the seed corn, right?
Exactly.
This is the sowing and reaping. Well, you're reaping before sowing, right? And what does it do? It destroys the amount of goods and services and the quality of goods and services available in the marketplace. So we have an entire mainstream university curriculum centered on Keynesian economics. It's the only thing you learn in school, by the way. There's no Austrian economics whatsoever.
It's extremely hard to find Austrian economic courses in this country.
It doesn't exist. I have a master's in accounting and finance. We learned a lot of economics. It was all Keynesian, right? The Economist magazine, one of the most popular publications on earth, all Keynesian economics. Yeah. Austrian economics really is sort of relegated to the dustbin in many ways, pre-Bitcoin. Thank God for Bitcoin.
Well, and the Austrians had it right. I mean, they actually, if you look at what happened in the 20s and 30s, they had it right, and yet they've been ignored.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So this idea of producing money out of thin air, but there's no, again, if the money is not the wealth, the money is a representation of the wealth. So if you're producing money without engaging in any production of goods or services, then it is everywhere and always just an instrument for stealing the goods and services that other people have produced.
That's right.
So it really is that simple. And yet, I guess through 100 plus years of Keynesian indoctrination, people have been convinced that we need to print money to solve problems. And
absolutely.
It always blows my mind.
And if we were to go to the gold standard, we'd have a Great Depression.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
exactly.
I mean, they've managed to demonize all the fixes for their problems.
Yes. Right? But if you take 20 seconds of critical thinking and you sit down and you're like, okay, there's an economic recession. People aren't getting enough food, shelter, whatever it may be. Yeah. Do you really think printing pieces of paper is going to put food in people's mouths or put shelter over people's heads? No. The answer is work and production creates those things, not money. Money is just the means to facilitate trade between people that allows us to specialize and therefore become more productive over time. But the actual printing of money is not going to do anything to produce anything.
Right. Well, if you're a politician, it might produce votes. I mean, if you're Joe Biden and you want to get the student vote, you say we're going to forgive these debts, which is effectively printing money.
Yes.
To the person who has the debt, that actually increases their purchasing power.
Sure.
Doesn't increase the purchasing power of society at large, as you point out.
Yeah.
But it does increase the odds that
Robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Yeah, Biden gets that vote.
Right.
And so, that's again the nature of the broken system.
Yeah, so it's based on a lie, like a fundamental
complete lie.
Again, an inversion of economic reality, and then the lie, as you're saying, like there's no free education. There's no free anything. The government can't give you free anything because everything the government gives you is stolen.
That's right.
Right?
That's exactly
robbed
right.
Peter to pay you. So whatever you're getting, it's come out of someone else's pocket.
Yeah. Yeah, and these lies, amazingly, have been told over and over again. And what's really fun to watch is how indignant these people get when we call them on the lies. I mean, I know of people who have actually met with Ben Bernanke and said things like, you realize that by printing money, you're stealing from people and that the Keynes is wrong. And he just, he literally stormed out of meetings when told that. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, they don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
In their Federal Reserve minutes that a businessman made a comment similar to that. And he said, look, this is obviously way above your head. If you don't have a PhD in economics, you shouldn't be weighing in here.
Crazy.
And it's like, what the fuck, dude?
Yeah.
I mean, no. I mean, the guy's a businessman. He understands how things work.
Yeah.
You're the one who shouldn't be weighing in.
Yes.
Here, right?
So this is I wrestle with this a lot. Like, do you think we'll pick Ben Bernanke, but any of Janet Yellen, whoever you want to put in there, in their heart of hearts, do they actually believe what they are saying?
Yeah.
Or do they know it's all bullshit and they're participating in a con?
No, I actually think they believe what they're saying.
So it's a self-deception.
I think they're deceiving themselves. Wow. Yeah, I do. In many cases, I think, and generally speaking, yes, I do. I think now I think it's nice. This goes back to the Upton Sinclair quote. I think it's nicely convenient that believing what they're saying also feathers their nest.
Of course.
Having a PhD in economics and Keynesian economics is valuable if you assume it's needed to run the system, and high priests like them are part of the system, and therefore, this is how Janet gets $7 million in speaking fees from major financial institutions that she regulates. Right. I mean, those are bribes.
For talking nonsense.
Yeah, for talking nonsense. Yeah. Those are bribes, right?
Yes.
I mean, the rumor is that Ben Bernanke he's on the board. We know he's an advisor to Citadel. We know that when Ken Griffin blew that thing up and the basis trade went tits up, we know that he would have failed if he hadn't gotten a swap line from the Fed. Well, he was one of their advisors. Guess who made the call to the Fed? I'm sure, and said, look, this guy's important. We can't let him blow up. The whole system will go down if he does blow up, which is always their excuse, right? And the rumor is he's getting paid $20 million a year as an advisor to Citadel.
Crazy.
Right? It's fucking crazy.
Crazy.
And it's corruption at the highest level.
Yeah.
At the absolute highest level.
And this is, I say this often. I find myself saying this often now, but Bitcoiners are a very disagreeable group of people. Like, it's almost one of our defining characteristics.
Yeah, pretty much.
We love to argue. You go on Bitcoin Twitter.
Well, we call bullshit on stuff for sure.
Call bullshit, even to a fault, right? We almost, if there's not enough to argue about, we'll find something to argue about, right? And that's good. That's healthy. That's like the antagonistic, adversarial thinking, right? We're always trying to look at it.
Yeah, don't trust, verify.
Exactly. Yeah. But the one thing I think all of us disagreeable Bitcoiners really agree on is that saying, right? No man is better than his incentives. And that's exactly what you're describing here. It's like these people are incentivized to internalize this economic falsehood and this lie, and it just becomes their identity, basically.
Absolutely.
And it just so happens.
And they give themselves prizes. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes.
Right.
I mean, you get a Nobel Prize for this shit.
Yes.
Right? I mean, look at Krugman.
Great segue to my next question. All right. So Paul Krugman, who is probably one of the main high priests,
absolutely,
right, in terms of
right at the top,
mainstream fiat economists, right, that is completely bathed in the Kool-Aid of this Keynesian nonsense.
Yeah.
I saw on your Twitter, he's recently declared that we won the war on inflation.
Isn't that amazing?
I'm not sure. That was the past few months. I think he said that.
Yeah, it was recent.
Which really seemed like a slap in the face to those that continue to live with the reality of ever rising prices.
Yeah,
right?
it is a slap in the face.
This has dispossessed so many. Like, I see people are struggling. People are really struggling with this nonsense.
It's sad.
And for you to just, his whatever 4 or 5 million followers.
Yeah, we won. Yeah,
it's like the mission accomplished banner, right? When George Bush was. It's just bullshit, frankly.
Total bullshit.
So why? Okay, and clearly we haven't won the war on inflation. Clearly, it has to do with money printing, which is another thing they try to deny. Right? They try to blame supply chains or Putin or Beyonce or whatever.
Evil corporations.
Evil
that are,
corporations.
Isn't that what Biden's saying?
Greedy corporations.
Greedy corporations. Yeah.
So why is it untrue that we have won the war on inflation? And what is the right way for people to understand this rhetoric and what inflation, and we've already touched on what inflation actually is, but how should people properly interpret rhetoric from people like Mr. Krugman?
Well, they should realize that he's a charlatan and a liar, and he's simping for the powers that be of whom he's won, and he gets paid academic consulting contracts, and he's probably teaching at Princeton and all the other stuff. He gets these awards and so forth. But we haven't won the war on inflation. The money supply grows historically over the last 50 years at 7% a year. That's inflation. We've won the war on reporting inflation. I mean, they, John,
another lie.
Another lie. Shadow Government Statistics has done a great job of showing how actual inflation is much higher than reported inflation. Right. And, look, have we won the war this year? I mean, commodities are at record highs. Oil is going back up. I tweeted this morning, let's go tap the Strategic Petroleum Reserve again. Mm-hmm. Oh, wait, we can't do that. Right. We already did that once. Yeah. Inflation is everywhere. Labor prices are a perfect example. And they're one of the key ones that I look at. We are not going back to 2% inflation because labor is getting between 5 and 6%, and rightfully so. Labor has been screwed for years and years in this country, and it has to get high rates. And even that 5 or 6% isn't really keeping track with what most people are experiencing in terms of their cost structure. Right. Groceries are up much more than 5 or 6%. We all know that. We see it every day. So it really just falls in the bucket of big lies the government consistently tells us, and it's why the voter base is so disheartened and so angry and so looking for alternatives, and and sadly there aren't many good alternatives.
Yeah. What so. Again, this is one of the things I really try to tease out on this show, and we've already touched on it a couple of times, but the fact that the money itself is rooted in a lie, right? That debt is money, really, right? That we can create money out of thin air, which I guess mechanistically how this works. The U.S. Treasury borrows from the Fed, right? So they're issuing new debt and borrowing dollars from the Fed.
Right.
Interest is paid to the Fed for creating this money out of thin air, which is a complete illusion, as we've touched on.
Yeah.
So that is a lie, right? That is fundamental. Like, money does not equal debt, right? If anything, one good definition of money is the final extinguisher of debt.
Correct.
So to have a debt-based money is an oxymoron in terms. So you're starting out with a lie, just at the basic technological level of money.
Right.
How does that then become lies at all these other levels, right? You're saying Krugman's incentivized to tell this lie. The CPI calculation is now a lie, and you mentioned shadow stats, right?
Yeah.
The calculation used to be done this way in the 80s, and if we did that calculation this way, reported inflation would be 20%.
Correct.
But every time it starts to creep up, they change the way they calculate it, right? And this is especially crazy. Sorry, just to emphasize this point. The CPI, right? The metric that is supposed to tell us what prices are varying, right? The variation in price levels. Yeah. Every time there's a variation in a particular good, they exclude the thing that's volatile, right? And I forget what the
food
term,
and energy.
they say it's too volatile to include in CPI. But CPI is the metric we're using to measure the volatility of prices. So again, an oxymoron, right?
And by the way, everyone needs food and energy. They're the base layer. Without food, we starve. Without energy, we can't do anything.
We can't move.
Right. So, look, don't get me started on just, the evil nature of our government. I think our kids will, say, what the fuck were you guys thinking? Letting 15 people on the Federal Reserve Board set the price of the most important thing in the world, which is money.
Yes.
What were you thinking?
Yeah.
I was a kid in the 70s, and, there was the Politburo ran the USSR, and, there were a lot of stories in that time. They had grain problems. They'd either have way too much grain or they'd have way too little grain. It was because the Politburo was setting grain prices.
Right.
There was no, prices should be set by supply and demand.
Yes.
The interest rate is the price of money. It's the cost of a person who saves money and has excess capital and says, I don't need this right now. I'll lend it to you to do something useful with. And the person who wants to borrow it says, okay, that cost of capital is low enough, and I know I can earn a return in excess of that cost, and therefore I'll pay you your 3% or your 5% or whatever the number is interest. That is the most important base layer price in the world, bar none. It determines what gets done and what doesn't get done. And you know, so we're going to let 15 people on the Federal Reserve Board set the price of that? It's fucking nuts. It'd be like saying we're going to let 15 people on this Federal Board determine the length of a yardstick.
Exactly.
And then, okay, Mr. Construction Guy, Mr. Builder, go out and try and build that house. And by the way, the yardstick's going to be changing all the time.
Yes.
But build it to spec.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
You can't do it.
Right.
You gotta have a system, a fair system, whereby supply and demand match one another.
Yes.
And the Keynesians have destroyed that. We don't have that.
That's a wonderful analogy, right? The idea of fixed standards.
Correct.
Right. We have a fixed standard for the inch, the foot, the meter, et cetera.
Right.
And upon those fixed standards, the machinery of global commerce is built.
Right.
If those standards fluctuated, you would have no ability to plan for the future.
Yeah. What if my gallon was different than your gallon was different than the next guy's gallon? And well, you know, it's close. I'm a little bit off. Well, you know, fine. Close isn't good enough. I mean, you know, there's a standard, right?
Yeah. And it's close is not good enough unless you're playing horseshoes or hand grenades.
Or nuclear war.
Yeah. But in engineering, right, we need precise, fixed standards that we can all communicate.
And so you got this fuzzy money standard.
Yeah.
What is money? I mean, that's the name of your show, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it is the defining standard of our age and the defining question of our age. I agree with you. And it's really what this fourth turning is all about.
Yeah.
We're in a fourth turning. Society is badly broken and getting worse. I mean, it's hard to say that because there are so many good things in this world and in this society and in the people that are in this world. And I think we're evolving to a higher consciousness. I think, I think we're going to avoid war. I think we're going to avoid nuclear destruction. I think a lot of great shit is going to happen. But I got to tell you, until we fix this money problem, and the reason I'm such a campaigner for fixing it is I don't want my kids to live in a shitty world.
Sure.
And I lived in a pretty good world. It wasn't perfect, but I grew up in the 70s. It was great.
Yeah.
You know, and compared to today, it was so much better. And a lot of people who are alive today don't remember that. They don't see it. They don't know what it was.
Yeah.
You know, there wasn't the rancor. There was a flat middle class. The rich weren't as crazy rich as they are now.
Yeah.
You know, people were generally speaking honest. I mean, of course, there were exceptions, Nixon being a good example.
Of course.
You know, the wars were smaller.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the Vietnam War was obviously a horrible thing. But the point is that, you know, there was a time when this country was a much, much better country, particularly right post-World War II.
Yeah.
And we were talking before the show, it's never been a perfect country.
Sure.
But I think the founding documents are nearly perfect. If we could adhere to them, we'd be in good shape.
Yeah. Well said. And so, it does come down to those words, right? It does seem like, again, when there's a lie built into the money, it's as if the money itself is evil, right? I mean, if we consider lying to be immoral, right? I mean, I guess you're pretty close to it being evil, but there are many good people in the world trying to do the right thing, right?
Most people.
Yeah.
Most people. I mean, in my view, you know, the government is like a litmus test for bad people. I mean, if you're in government, almost by definition, you're bad. I mean, I've said this many times. I would rather pick my senators out of the fucking phone book randomly I'm serious. I'm not kidding you. I am sure they would do a better job than the people we elect.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, we could, you know, if we just took, you know, graduates from good colleges who had mid-level jobs and threw them all in a bucket and randomly picked one and said, you know what, you're president.
Yes.
We'd be better off than we are today.
For sure.
I mean, because it's like adverse selection.
Yes.
Because we're getting, you know, the evil people who like to control other people
exactly.
are rising to the top and are drawn to this because they can get illegitimate power. I mean, this is the story of Dick Cheney. I mean, the guy's just a fucking shit kicker.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, he gets into government and, you know, he becomes a vice president. He, you know, runs Halliburton. He starts wars. I mean, what the fuck?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I don't want evil people like that in positions of power in my country. I just don't.
That's such a great point that the most sociopathic
and
the most gifted with rhetorical flourish are drawn to these positions of power.
Oh, it's like bees to honey. I mean, it's you know, it's because they could never get any of it. They couldn't get it legitimately.
Exactly.
Right.
And those people are very rare, right? Like the Dick Cheneys of the world. There's not many sociopathic people that are gifted at that level. So literally picking people at random, you'd be much better
I'm sure
off.
we'd do better. I'm sure we would. Yeah.
And I think Plato would agree too, that he was saying that until philosophers become kings, right, that we're going to have these problems, that you needed the people that actually don't want to govern to govern.
Right. Yeah, to me, it's almost a litmus test. I mean, if you don't want the job, then I'm more likely to want you.
Yes, exactly. Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. Over the past 9 years, I've been going through a pretty serious struggle with my personal health. It started with a sharp pain and stiffness in my hip after a lifting injury, which I later learned was related to some pretty extensive inflammation in my gut. Then I developed an autoimmune issue, and soon I was having joint pain all over, skin irritations, and all kinds of digestive issues. I visited many doctors trying to figure out what was wrong, but none of them were able to help me fix any of my issues. I eventually started to see an energy healer with whom I had some limited success, but it wasn't until I started working with the biohacker Anthony DiClementi last year that I was finally able to start making real progress on my healing journey. Anthony spent a lot of time with me learning about my specific situation and worked with me to adapt a custom health plan to address my needs. Anthony has served as a personal biohacker for celebrities, billionaires, and professional athletes all over the world. Besides helping people like me overcome health issues, Anthony and his world-class medical team also help guys that just want to optimize their cognitive performance, guys that want to pack on some muscle, and guys that just want to get shredded. Anthony keeps a tight book of business and is selective about the clients he brings on. To apply for Anthony's biohacking services, text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. Again, to apply for Anthony's biohacking services, just text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. We're talking about the high priests like Mr. Paul Krugman, some of these other mainstream fiat economists. One of the things they do, and I intend for this show to be a countermeasure against that, is wrapping high finance in this complex jargon, right? Trying to make it look mystical. And, if you don't
have a PhD, you don't count.
You need a PhD to understand. It's like, no, you don't. Yeah. One of the areas that they try to mystify is the area of U.S. Treasury bonds, right? Which is just debt, right? It's whatever the government has borrowed. And so there have been some recent, I saw you tweeting about this, recently there have been some rather abysmal outcomes at U.S. Treasury auctions where they're actually trying to auction off government debt to private parties, foreign holders, et cetera, right? Or foreign buyers, rather. So what are U.S. Treasuries?
Okay.
And what do these abysmal outcomes of their recent auctions tell us about economic conditions?
Yeah, that's great. Both great questions. So U.S. Treasuries are the debt of the U.S. federal government, and they're bonds, bills, and notes. And basically, there's no law that says you have to have them. There have been very short periods of time in the history of the public where there was no public debt outstanding. I mean, when Andrew Jackson was president, But in general, what happens is governments find themselves in a position where, for a variety of reasons, they want to do things that they don't have, that they can't tax the people to pay for. And so they run a deficit, right? And so they need, capital to do those things. And they spend more than they bring in tax revenue. Okay. Yep. That creates a deficit. The deficit needs to be financed. In other words, they need to get money to pay for that deficit. Now they can print it. We'll get to that in a minute. But the original concept was, okay, well then we don't have enough in the operating budget to pay for this. We'll borrow it. We'll borrow it from the population. And by the way, sometimes in a responsible way, World War II came along, right? We had to, it was existential. We had to save the world from the Axis powers and from fascism. And, we borrowed a shitload of money and we made it a patriotic thing to do. We had war bond drives and everything else. We ran up the debt to 130% of GDP. By the way, we also squashed the economy. I mean, we gave out coupons for gasoline. We really said, look, we need to put all of the country's efforts into winning this war. And it was a good thing to have done it, right? Because it was a war we had to win. And so that's the good use of government debt, and it can happen, okay? And then, by the way, after that, they financially repressed us and they got it back down to a manageable level.
Yeah.
But so to answer your question, what are treasuries? They are debts created by the government. And the important, I think, number to look at is what is the government debt relative to the GDP of the country. So if you've got a healthy GDP, gross domestic product.
Which is revenue. Basically.
Which is revenue. It's basically, if your economy is healthy and you've got modest debts, 10%, 20%. Yeah. Okay, fine. Pay some interest on that. Maybe we spend a little ahead, run that number up and down. Yeah. The debt, that number today is 120%, okay? In World War II, it was 130%. And that's the size of the total U.S. federal debt compared to the GDP. Yes. That's a big number. It's a very big number. The only country with a higher number is Japan. Yeah. And they have an enormous savings culture, and that's how they've gotten away with it. But we don't have an enormous, and they run a trade deficit. We run a trade surplus. We run a trade deficit. Yeah. But so you've got this debt that has continued to grow, and it's continued to grow because politicians find it useful to give out programs and to spend more than they get in, and they don't want to tax people. There's kind of a limit to how much tax they can impose, or else they'll get thrown out of office. Right. But there are programs they want to do. They can't afford it. They say, fine, we're going to borrow it in terms of debt. I think I'll make one point about the debt that I find is very interesting. You alluded to the fact there have been some Treasury auctions that have been difficult and close to failing. The U.S. has run up a lot of debt, and it's gotten worse, and the deficits have gotten worse. And what I find fascinating is that in COVID, we ran enormous deficits for all of the obvious reasons. And yet, and you would think, okay, the COVID crisis has passed, you would think the deficits would come down substantially. They haven't. They've stayed, they're not at peak level. I think peak level was for 1 year was like 3 or 4, but we're headed towards 3. They came down the year after COVID, into the mid ones. Now we're at 2, and I think we're headed to 3, and this is the federal deficit. That needs to be financed, and that's tough to finance because people can see that the government is not acting responsibly, and they're beginning to think, hey, you're asking me to buy this debt. It's got a coupon on it that will provide me with a return, but I'm afraid inflation is going to be higher than that coupon rate. So if I buy a piece of 10-year debt that pays a 4% coupon, but I know that inflation is 7%, I know that at the end of 10 years, I will have lost purchasing power. I will not get... I'll get back the $1,000. I'll get back my 4%, but actually I got debased at 7.
Right. So you're saying you're getting back 4% more dollars, but the dollars are 7% weaker that you get back
on any given year. Yeah. The other thing that I think is going on that I think people need to focus on that's really important because it happens in third world countries, it happens in countries with sovereign debt crisis. People are resisting. I mean, Stanley Druckenmiller said, look, when our rates were very, very low, Janet Yellen should have termed out as much of the debt as possible into 10, 20, and 30-year things, which would have been smart because we'd have gotten low interest rates on long debt. I don't think she could. I don't think there were buyers. I think people know that the U.S. is going in the wrong direction. They know we're behaving irresponsibly. Right. And what's happening now is we're being forced to sell more and more debt in these short-term notes. Of course. It's getting to be a very, very large percentage. And if you look at the pattern of other countries that have had debt defaults, very high inflation or hyperinflation, this is what happens to them as well. Right. No one will trust your longer-term debt. Of course. You can only borrow on a very short-term basis. Right. And then when short-term interest rates spike, it's game over. Right. And then, because the debt cost, and I showed you a chart, which maybe we can put up in the show notes, which shows that the interest rate on all U.S. federal debt, which was in the $300-400 billion range pre-COVID, is now running at $1.1 trillion. These are just the interest payments. This is just the interest payments. The annualized interest payments on the U.S. federal debt is running at a $1.1 trillion rate. That's 3x where it was pre-COVID. Yeah. And in the projection, if we leave the interest rates where they are and the debt growth continues as it's been growing, the projection is that interest cost will be $1.6 trillion at the end of calendar 2024, this year that we're in. For comparison, the entire United States defense budget is $900 billion. So 1.6 in interest, $900 billion on defense. all of Social Security, I think, is about 1.2, and then Medicaid's another something. I don't know the exact number. But the point is, the interest is going to eat us alive.
Yeah.
And if interest rates keep going up, it's only going to get worse. And this is why I believe what we're in is a sovereign debt crisis. And what they will do, I don't think, and what they should do is what Volcker did, raise rates to the point where the real rate of return is positive and shrink the debt down, get it all under control. But if they try and do that, everything will collapse. And so what they will do, in my opinion, is they will print money to cover the interest payments, which again is a pattern that one sees in very highly indebted countries that have run themselves into this. And Reinhardt and Rogart did a very large paper that showed that when, in 49 out of 50 countries, the only other exception is Japan, that got to the point where they had 120% of debt to GDP, they all had massive inflation, they defaulted, or they had hyperinflation.
Right.
So I guess what I'm trying to point out, I know but the listeners probably aren't all aware of it, is that we are heading into, the U.S. federal government is driving us into a monetary crisis.
Exactly.
They are driving a very severe monetary crisis, so that we are now at a point where, we've been saying this for years. You and I last met in 2021. That's 3 years ago. I've been saying it for 20 fucking years. People think I'm crazy, right? But it's getting acute right now. We're going critical. Let me give you another stat that just blows my mind. And actually, this is in my quarterly letter as well, which will be out and it's free. It's on the internet. In 100 days, recently, we added $1 trillion worth of debt to the U.S. debt balance. U.S. debt balance is 34.6 or something, roughly. I don't know the exact. You can check it on the debt clock. But in 100 days, we added $1 trillion. Well, there are 365 days in a year. So does that mean we're growing the debt at $365 trillion? $365 billion, $3.65 billion a year.
Wow.
If so, that means we're increasing our debt at 10% a year, whereas GDP is growing at 2%. That goes back to my pinned tweet.
Right.
GDP pays interest on the debt.
Right.
This can't continue.
Right. It's mathematically impossible.
It's mathematically impossible. Now, it can continue to the extent that they will print money to let it continue, but that will drive higher inflation.
Yes.
Which, so it's all part of the same ecosystem of a broken government financial system.
Wow.
Right? Yeah, it's really quite bleak. Sadly, but it is what it is.
Yeah, and so when the financial prospects of a country become especially dim, right?
Yeah.
As the U.S. is insolvent, right? The debts
very much
exceed the revenues. By the way, if you look at in terms of tax revenues, I think tax revenues are like $4 trillion.
About 4, yeah.
And we're talking about 34 trillion
of debt.
That's public and private. So U.S. government debt is
like 20
something.
Yeah.
So you've got 20.
No, 34 is the U.S. government debt. So some of it is owed to the Social Security Administration.
Okay.
So it's not a perfect 34.
Okay.
It's like 28, but whatever. Yeah.
In terms of, if you look at U.S. government revenue, tax revenue is $4 trillion,
right,
and their debts are in excess of $20 trillion. Let's say you're talking like literally 5 times your income debt, right? So if you made $100,000 a year, you have $500,000 in credit card debt basically outstanding.
That's kind of right. That's one way of looking at it. And you've got, let's just to stick to those numbers, and you've got an interest charge, let's see, of $1.6 trillion coming up at the end of this year on your $4 million. So, of your $4 million of tax income, 35% of it is going to pay interest and rising. Right. And just let's throw some more icing on the cake. Biden just came out with his 2025 projection.
Yeah.
He wants to grow federal spending to $7.3 trillion, which is a 13% increase year on year. So again, and tax revenue is going up, but not that much.
Right.
So the point is the deficit keeps getting wider.
Yes.
One way that if you ran a deficit like after World War II, eventually what you do is you cut your spending and then you run surpluses.
Yeah.
And you slowly work your way out of it.
Yeah.
But in our case, no, it's getting worse every year.
Right. And so I think this chart you showed me, which again is in your report, by end 24, we're at $1.6 trillion in interest expense on the debt.
Yes.
total revenue for the federal government is in the $4 trillion range. So you're talking about 50%, well, not quite 50% of the revenue going to just interest expense.
Correct.
So again, if you're using that rough analogy, you make $100,000 a year, but you're paying $50,000 a year in credit card interest.
Correct.
That's kind of the financial situation,
right.
and worsening, right? Because they're adding to the debt year over year.
Yeah.
Mathematically impossible, right? The United States is bankrupt, and it is discharging this bankruptcy through, and this is where we talk about debt monetization,
money
right?
printing.
Which basically means printing of money, defaulting on the debt, but in a way that
it's a soft
citizens.
It's a soft default,
right? They don't pay for the default. They
do in their purchasing power and their savings getting debased.
Citizens pay for it, though, right?
They're
actually
I'm
paying.
sorry. You're saying the government doesn't pay for the default.
Exactly.
You're right. Yeah, no, we're all paying for it.
The government externalizes the cost of the
water
default
the beer.
on the people by watering down the wine. Yes, exactly.
Exactly.
So what are people to do and think about all of this? I mean, this is scary.
Well, it is scary, and
large.
and I don't want to be an extremist, and I'm not trying to scare anybody above and beyond what I think is realistic. But what I've been saying, and it's not it's not like I've changed my tune, right? I've been saying this for 20 years, and certainly the last 5 years, is that the time is growing short, and that it is important for people to put their savings into assets that will be protected, that the government cannot print.
Right.
And the apex asset in that category is Bitcoin. But there are others too. I mean, gold and silver work, housing works, autos work. I mean, just stuff.
Right.
Goods
and services.
Goods and services.
Yeah.
I mean, because storing food, whatever it might be. I mean, as it gets worse and worse, in Weimar Germany, where they had a hyperinflation, I mean, people were getting paid and literally that day rushing out to buy things.
Yes.
Because they knew the price of said things would be more one day later.
Yes. Well, even worse than that, they would buy all their beer at the bar at the beginning of the night because the bar would change the prices of beer.
I didn't know that story. I believe it. I believe it. Yeah.
So it's crazy, right? It doesn't. Again, you can't
outrun it.
You can't be prudent.
No.
You can't. And the whole point of economics is to be prudent, right? To produce more than you consume and save.
Correct.
But you can't save in this environment. So it destroys the process of savings. And the process of savings is the process of civilization,
Absolutely.
Right? Delayed gratification, production in excess of consumption. This is how we've built up all of this.
I mean, this is just to go back to the very basics, this is where, the fisherman was catching fish by hand.
Exactly.
And had, one fish a day or whatever. He was lucky enough to snare with a spear by hand. And then he took a few days off, or he starved, or somebody else fed him with something else. And he figured out a way to, put together a net, which, was in a way savings. He took, and that net then allowed him to catch a lot more fish. Yeah. And his productivity went up. But that only occurred because he had saved up enough dried fish that he had something to eat for the time when he was making the net, or somebody else fed him with something else.
That's right.
And so you have to accumulate capital to invest in productivity to make the world a more efficient place and have all of our living standards go up.
Exactly.
If you don't do that, as you said earlier, I like the word where you said you eat the seed corn.
Yes.
If you eat the seed corn, you don't have anything to plant to get corn in the future.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Or another one that people use often is, you're burning the furniture for heat.
Exactly.
Well, it's really nice. You're warm.
Yes.
But what are you going to sit on?
Yes. Sacrificing your long run interest to your short run interest.
Your short run needs.
Yes, needs. Yeah.
Yeah.
So these Treasury auctions, then the U.S. is insolvent.
Yep.
People are then only willing to buy shorter duration debt because the longer term prospects are increasingly bleak, as we've spelled out here. They can see that
inflation's coming.
Would we also expect these treasuries to start yielding more, right?
Yes.
That people, creditors will charge more given the risk associated with these notes.
Yeah, the people who are buying those things, in my opinion, it's amazing they are. In the proverbial game, they are the suckers at the table. Anyone who's buying a treasury bill, right? And a treasury, I should say a treasury note or bond, which is by definition longer term.
Right.
I mean, I own some treasury bills; they mature in 4 weeks.
Right.
But if you're buying longer duration fixed income debt, you're going to get smoked because inflation is going to continue, in my opinion, going to continue to accelerate. You're not going to get your purchasing power back. And so yes, and as this becomes more and more developed, interest rates are going to go higher. I mean, bond holders already, the 60-40 portfolio holders have already been smoked. I mean, bond funds are down 50% in the last 3 years.
Right.
And the interest rates haven't compensated them for that.
Yeah.
And some people think we're going back to a deflationary world. I don't. We're in an inflationary cycle. It's going to be brutal, in my opinion. And so, as these interest rates go higher, that makes the government's condition worse. And this is what we describe, and James Lavish has done the best job of showing this on Twitter, is as a death doom loop. I mean, interest rates go up, the government's interest rate costs get higher. That makes the deficit higher. That means you've got to sell more debt. When you sell debt, you have to find buyers. It's a supply and demand thing. Buyers say, I'm not willing to buy at that price. I need a higher interest rate. Okay, interest rates are up, more interest costs, bigger deficit. It's a doom loop.
Wow.
It's a cycle, right? Wow. And eventually what I could see happening is the entire federal government bond market comes to the Federal Reserve and says, sold to you. I don't want to hold this shit anymore. And the Fed has to buy it because, look, we saw last fall when interest rates went through 5%, that was an earthquake. And within 2 weeks, you saw 14 Fed governors come out and talk about how, oh, no, we're done raising rates and we think the interest rates, and they talked it back down to under 4%. They had to. They knew that 5 was a critical number. They absolutely had to. And, if interest rates went to 10%, like Jamie Dimon the other day said he thought interest rates go to 8%. If interest rates go to 8%, this entire country is going to be bankrupt. There's no way. And the federal government's going to be bankrupt. The average interest rate today on the federal debt is about 3.2. Okay, the average short-term note is selling at about 5. As these things roll over and they go back into the short-term notes at 5, and imagine the short-term note could go to 6 or 7 or 8. This debt charge is going to become $2 trillion or $3 trillion. On 4. So we're going to get to the point where interest is the entire taxable, revenue. You see where we're going here. It's but by the way, before anyone panics, my sense is they're not going to let that happen. In other words, they are not going to let the bond market fail. They are not going to let us get into the government's broken condition that everyone can see. They are going to subtly but surely figure out ways to print money. The most recent of which we discussed before the show was the BTFP. It wasn't a big number. It was a couple $100 billion, 140 billion. But, when Silicon Valley Bank failed, it was a big deal. And so they wanted to prevent all the other banks from failing and, yelling, flip-flop back and forth between should we guarantee them all or shouldn't we? And we've got 17 trillion of bank deposits in this country. Can you imagine taking the whole 17 trillion onto the Fed balance sheet, which is now 7? That would have been a mess. Wow. But they ginned up this BTFP. They just pulled it out of thin air. So don't worry, banks. You got bad stuff, give it to us. 60 cents on the dollar, we'll give you $1 back. Money printing. And they're going to find more things like this. Of course. And they're going to say they're not money printing, but they are.
Of course.
And this is because they're doing what politicians do, which is they keep their system going and they lie about it.
Yes.
Right?
This is the perennial addiction that humans cannot kick, right? It's if you have the ability to print money, it is just the most politically expedient thing you can do, right? You don't need any votes. People don't understand the cost associated with it. It kicks the can down the road. Like it is just, it's sort of hidden in plain sight.
Exactly.
But the cost, or what do we say? The bill always comes due, right?
The bill comes due. We're paying it now with $5 gasoline. The bill for the next round will come due because, you're paying it in your steak bill. Yeah. Right. I don't know what ribeye is now, but
$35 a pound.
Yeah. Okay. So on the next round, the gasoline bills will be $8 or $10 a gallon, and your ribeye is going to be 50, or I don't know what the number is, but it's going to be higher, right?
Yeah, it went from 11, 12, 13, 3-4 years ago to 34, 35 today.
Yeah.
Probably going to triple again, right?
It's going to be higher.
So people, I guess the punchline, the action item on all of this is get ready for more inflation.
Sadly,
right?
yes.
So hold things that cannot be printed.
Yes.
As savings, basically.
Yes, and even if you want to be a little aggressive, and I wouldn't recommend being highly aggressive, but borrowing to, small amounts that you can service and you won't be called in on.
Yeah.
And then exchanging that for something that's sound.
Right.
You will probably, I'm suggesting credit card debt at 20%.
Sure.
But, certainly I know I did it with a piece of property I bought back before COVID, and, the interest, 30-year money at 3%. I was like, that's a gift.
It's free money. Yeah, exactly.
I could have done what I was doing. I bought a house. I could have done what I was doing without doing that.
Right.
But I would rather have had that. I just used the Fannie Mae one. I just borrowed $500,000.
Yeah.
And I put it into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Because, and by the way, the Bitcoin has vastly outperformed the 3%.
Of course.
So, and this is, when you have a highly inflationary environment, carrying a small amount of debt that's low cost,
yes,
that you won't be blown out of,
right,
isn't crazy if you're taking the proceeds. And
right.
Actually, this is what Saylor is doing with MicroStrategy.
Yeah.
He's issuing debts, and he's using those debts to buy the sounder form of money. And he knows he will pay back those dollars that when they are debased.
Yes.
And he knows the asset he is purchasing will gain purchasing power against those dollars.
Exactly. So you're borrowing.
He's brilliant. And as you pointed out before we started, what was the MicroStrategy market cap 10 years ago? It's like,
I think they've gone from like 2 to 24 billion in less than 4 years.
Not bad.
Running that strategy.
Not bad, right? That works.
Yeah, and you're borrowing stronger dollars to pay back weaker dollars over time with debt covenants that are fixed, right?
Correct.
And it's on good collateral. The interest rate doesn't vary.
And you don't want to get highly levered.
Right.
I'm talking about small amounts because in general, I'm not a leveraged guy.
Yeah.
The one thing you don't do, just FYI, because I saw people do it and they got blown up, is do not borrow against your Bitcoin.
Of course. Too volatile.
Do not. It's too volatile.
Yeah.
And, people believe the Plan B model, last cycle. And I saw guys who had one Bitcoin, they borrowed 4 and it went down. They lost the one.
Out.
Yeah,
exactly.
they got wiped out.
Yeah. So, and that is part of the pernicious fiat thing, right?
Well, you're trying to get ahead.
We're all incentivized to take on in debt.
Well, yeah.
To take on debt because the currency is being depreciated. So it's the incentive is anti-savings, right?
Well, and when you know that everything's, we're also all incentivized to gamble because you know that, it might be the only way you got a chance of staying ahead of this thing.
Exactly.
It's eating you alive.
Yeah.
If you just take your money and put it in the bank, it's just losing value.
Right. Okay, so you've highlighted this already today, but the U.S. government is running record levels of deficit spending.
Correct.
So again, to demystify the language here, this means they're spending money, more than they're bringing in revenue, right?
Correct.
So the U.S. government revenues are $4 trillion. They're spending $6 trillion.
6.5, probably.
6.5. Which is another way of saying they're running their business at a loss.
Correct.
Right? So the business is not profitable.
Right.
How long can this continue and where does this lead? You already said it's money printing is the way they ultimately go, but
I'm not the guy
what inning are we in?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's very hard. Nobody knows, including me, and I'm not the guy to ask because I thought in 2008 it was all over. I thought in 71, I didn't think in 71 because I didn't know what was going on, but there have been many times I've thought it's all over. But I will say this, we're getting a lot closer to it, quote unquote, being all over because, the contractions are getting closer together and they're getting larger, and so, I believe it's like childbirth, at some point the child comes out, we in
Something like an earthquake too, right? Like
same thing, or an avalanche.
Yeah.
In 08, the Fed balance sheet was $800 billion. We did TARP, it went to 1.7. We did QE 1, 2, and 3, it went to 3.7. Okay, that's big, but it took us 3 or 4 years to grow the Fed balance sheet by $3 trillion. COVID comes along, the Fed balance sheet had been drawn down a bit. Call it $3 trillion. In less than a year, we went from 3 to 9.
Right.
That's a lot shorter time frame. That's a lot bigger amount.
Yeah, larger multiple too. Right?
Much larger. Amount and multiple.
Yes,
right.
Yeah.
So. So the contractions are getting big, they're getting closer and they're getting bigger. My personal view is that we will have a full-fledged monetary crisis by 2030, and it'll be resolved by 2035. That's just my personal guess. It could be sooner. And we talked about this pre-show, let me just give you an example. We live in an internet world. We live in a world where news travels fast. We live in a world where everybody's plugged in.
Yeah.
I love the story of Silicon Valley. I have an account at Silicon Valley. They were my bank. And in fact, on my pinned tweet, the background picture is a bunch of people standing in line outside my bank in Wellesley, and there are 2 Porsches in the parking lot, which I just thought was perfect, right? This is Fiat Bank.
Yeah.
And so one day, the Silicon Valley Bank was perfectly fine. You know, they were cruising along. They were in Silicon Valley, and they had tons and tons of money in there that they had mostly raised from venture capitalists and wealthy California technology people. And they had about $100 billion of deposits on the bank. They also held a lot. They made the mistake. They bought a lot of long duration treasuries at low interest rates. When interest rates went up, those treasuries went underwater big time, and they had losses. They needed some capital. They sold some bonds, and they sold them at a big loss, and they had to report it. Some accountant in California looked at that and said, "Oh my God, They did the math, and they said, "Holy shit, this bank on paper has $20 billion of equity, but in reality, if you mark these bonds appropriately, they have a $20 million equity deficit. There's $40 billion that's not here."
Wow.
He called up some of the big venture capitalists, and as we all know, banks have insurance, and that insurance is FDIC provided. And if you have less than $250,000 in the bank, FDIC says, bank goes tits up, we're going to send you the money, no sweat, right?
If you believe that.
Yeah, if you believe it. Well, there's that, because that fund is only a couple $100 billion, and there's 17 trillion of deposits.
Right. Exactly.
But let's set that aside.
Yeah.
Everyone who has millions of dollars in a bank knows that if the bank goes bankrupt, you theoretically could lose something.
Yeah.
So Silicon Valley venture guy calls his friends, wires, all the news goes out. This is like on a Friday or a Monday. Next Tuesday, or Tuesday or Wednesday, the following week, $48 billion get withdrawn from this bank in one day.
Wow.
One day, half of the deposits disappear. I mean, this isn't George Bailey and the savings and loan.
Yeah.
This is like, holy shit, electronic click.
Yes,
I'm
yes.
taking all my goddamn money out of there right now.
Bad news travels faster than ever.
Right.
Yeah.
One day later, we're bankrupt. The FDIC, getting taken over. So, I mean, this, what is that? It was a point of recognition. The Silicon Valley Bank was bankrupt. 2 weeks ahead of that, nobody knew.
Yeah.
1 week ahead of it, one accountant knew.
Yeah.
He played the telephone game and told some friends. They had internet connections and friends. Boom, a week later, it was gone. Okay?
And they're bankrupt. That's crazy.
And they're bankrupt.
Wow.
Think about that. Federal Reserve, we know it's bankrupt. You and I know it's bankrupt.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's going to spread with the same kind of rapidity.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting model, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, if suddenly you'd rather be a little early rather than a little late when everyone says, "Holy shit, this dollar is no goddamn good."
Yes.
I want to exchange mine for shit.
Yes.
That can't be printed.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. This is almost like the butterfly effect on steroids, right? Where
Right.
The butterfly that flaps its wings in Japan causes the hurricane in Florida.
Correct.
But it's like that, but we've accelerated the pathway through digital communications, basically.
Correct.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's kind of an amazing story. So back to your when's it going to happen time frame, nobody really knows.
Right. This also, I would imagine, plays into the global awareness of Bitcoin, right? Just the fact that people are talking about the nature of money. For instance, the term fiat currency has become popularized in the wake of Bitcoin's emergence. So, as you know, pre-Bitcoin, when you use that term, no one knew what you were talking about. So, is this getting back to that change in consciousness you alluded to earlier? That the information technology is changing the way we perceive and think about the world?
I think that's right. I think it is to a certain degree, and and prices are signal. I mean, what would happen if we woke up one morning and Bitcoin was up $50,000 in a day?
Yeah.
What would people do? What would people think? I mean, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's weird.
Yeah.
And some people think, God, that's great.
Yeah.
Sold to you. I'm out of here. I've got a nice profit.
Yeah.
Other people will go, no. I know what this means.
That's right.
It's going up 200 and then 500 and then a million. And I mean, this is fiat currency failing.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So, I mean, and that, that could be the trigger event similar to the accountant saying, oh my God, this bank has negative equity.
Right. Yeah. So these emperor has no clothes moments
exactly
can just explode quickly.
I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just it has to factor into the realm of possibilities.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. What you're describing here is exactly what I've I call it the liquidity of ideas has never been higher, right?
Right.
Information moves so fast.
That's a great way of saying it. Yeah.
And you know, a lot of this peer-to-peer dialogue, you know, we've moved from like a top-down media paradigm to more of a many-to-many media paradigm.
Right.
So you're able to get your news from a much wider variety of sources.
Sure.
And I think that lets people triangulate onto truth much more efficiently than top-down media did,
agree.
right?
Yeah.
And it also kind of disables the government's ability to socially engineer people through mainstream media.
They still try, and some still fall for it.
They still do, but
Right.
mainstream media audience
Oh yeah.
they're declining, right? It's precipitous
time.
decline. People are going
Big time.
online. They're
Yeah.
following individuals that
Yeah.
they trust.
Exactly.
It's becoming a whole different pattern of information flow in the world, basically, right? Versus we're moving from top down to
you know, and that's the beauty of what's going on at a large scale is decentralization, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, we grew this great centralization system because of the efficiency it provided. I mean, kind of starting with Henry Ford and the assembly line, and we just grew that all the way up through the Industrial Revolution in the 1900s, et cetera, et cetera. But what we realized in World War II is we realized that centralization is dangerous in a certain way because you get a guy at the top who's an asshole like Hitler,
right.
and he can go, you know, kill 6 million people.
That's right.
Right. And so, you know, we didn't, the microchip, which then led to the internet, which has now led to Bitcoin, is, I think, God-given. And, you know, because I'm Christian, I think it's a God-given thing that's a savior of mankind in the sense that it's allowing us to destroy these big, corrupt, you know, sclerotic institutions, you know, that we call the federal government and, you know, the CIA and I mean, all these things. And so, yeah, I mean, just as you point out, I mean, you know, Tucker can draw more than Fox News, right?
Yes, right,
I mean,
right.
Joe Rogan can draw more than those guys.
Yes.
And you know, and smart people are getting their information in lots of different ways.
Yes.
And we're triangulating in on the truth. And you know, none of us know what it is. None of us have it absolutely. But you know, you can be damn sure I'm not going to believe Judy Miller telling me from the New York Times that they've got weapons of mass destruction because the CIA whispered it in her ear. I mean, she can go fuck herself. I mean, it's just, it's a different world. And
Yes.
as Preston says, when I sit with him, we love talking about this. It's so fun to watch the other side squirm.
It really is.
Because they're just getting their ass handed to them.
Yeah.
And it's only going to get worse.
Yes.
You know?
The responses and the narratives become increasingly exotic and ridiculous.
It's hilarious almost.
Like I tweeted this recently with Christina
Lagarde? Oh, yeah.
talking about how climate change drives inflation.
Oh, yeah.
And
Sure.
I was just like, I translated it, said, oh, the weather dictates how much the central bank steals from you. Like that's how asinine these things they're saying are.
Yeah. I mean, I can't think of a couple of examples or any examples right now, but there's several times in the last 6 months where I've just watched what the other side has done. I'm just like, really?
Yeah.
Are you serious? I mean, is this all you got?
Yeah. And you see it in the comments, though, that like there's hundreds of comments on that particular post, and people know it's bullshit. They're like,
course
I can't believe she can say this.
Yeah.
So people are waking up to it.
Absolutely.
Like, I think people in general are much more intelligent and much more capable of detecting bullshit than governments have given them credit for.
I think you're right, but I must say I was extremely disappointed with our citizens' reaction to the COVID scam.
I was too.
I mean,
Yeah,
I was just like,
too.
holy shit.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I actually realized how Hitler pulled it off.
Yeah. Right.
Do you know what I mean? I was like, holy fucking shit. We got that many dumb people that believe this shit. I mean, the way they attacked ivermectin, I mean, which was a great solution. I was taking the horse paste.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's ridiculous.
Yeah, same.
It was just ridiculous.
Could you elaborate on that? What was it about that instance of social engineering that gave you a glimpse into how Hitler pulled it
Well,
off?
I mean, you know, it was so obviously coordinated by the drug companies on the other side, and they needed, in order to get it through the way they got it through, they had to have no alternative treatments, and yet there were several very well-known, you know, alternative protocols, including ivermectin. What was the other one? HCQ or hydroxychloroquine? Or,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just they rammed this shit down our throat. I mean, it was outrageous. It was absolutely outrageous. And, you know, sadly, a very, very big part of the population bought it.
Yeah.
And I mean, at that point, I was like, oh God, this country is beyond hope. You know?
Yeah, I lost some faith as well. And I reflected on what made me so averse to all of it.
Yeah.
And I think it really comes down to a very simple piece of business wisdom. There's that old saying that if the product is free, then you are the product. And so when I saw them pushing this jab, right?
For free.
Not only is it free, but you'll get a free donut or a free Happy Meal. Or there was also like the kids advertising, like all these, the mayor's eating a hamburger and getting in on, like, it was such a push to give in an attempt to give away this free thing by giving people so much free stuff.
Yeah.
That's all I needed to know. Actually, I didn't need to read any biomedical literature whatsoever. I was like, that's all I need to know.
Good instincts.
That's not for me.
Yeah, good
That's
instincts.
not for anyone in my family because whatever's in that thing, they're trying to give it away too hard. It's not healthy, whatever it is.
Right. Yeah.
And so, it's another interesting angle on money's role in social engineering.
I mean, I think now as time has gone by, some people who were shoved into it have reconsidered it and have read and now we've got alternative literature and we're getting data studies that show, and again, that all leads to loss of credibility on the part of the elites and the part of the system.
Of course.
I mean, this country is angry, and rightly so.
Yes.
Absolutely. Rightly so.
And this dovetails into, so government's insolvent. The only solution is money printing.
Yeah.
More people are waking up to this reality because of the liquidity of ideas that we've talked about. Information moves at an unparalleled speed.
Yeah.
You tweeted that there was a headline recently that Costco is selling as much as $200 million per month of gold bars.
Isn't that interesting?
What does this tell us about consumer confidence in the U.S. dollar?
Nothing good. I mean, it's that's a lot. That's big volume.
That's a lot.
And I've been trying to, for my report, I haven't been able to find it yet. I've been trying to get the statistics from some of the other bullion dealers. But again, I think there's a big piece of the population that is coming to realize it's aware of this. It's funny. Some of the elites and the highly educated are the last to get it. I mean, my business school classmates and people who have made money in fiat land, they just think I'm nuts. And they just don't get it at all. Guys who are fishermen and carpenters and blue collar guys that I interact with down on Cape Cod in the summertime, they totally get it, and they've been storing silver coins since forever. Yeah, because they're like, fuck, the government's going to print money. I know how this works. Yeah, and they take their savings and they buy silver coins. Yeah. So, I think what's going on, when you consider that, all the red states, you got kind of solid, hardworking people who can look at the history and look at and read the results and say, I know what's going on here. Yeah, my currency's getting trashed, and they may not be sophisticated enough to buy Bitcoin, or they may be afraid of it because of FTX, or they. Whatever. I mean, but they damn sure know that, the government can't print silver and the government can't print gold. Yeah. And so they're going to take their savings and convert them into these things. Now, $2.4 billion is not all the money in the world if it's running at a $200 million monthly rate, but it's not trivial either. Sure. It's a real number.
That's a big number for just U.S., right?
Yeah, just U.S., I would assume. Costco,
Is that, man, we keep kind of coming back to this idea, the no man is better than his incentive saying, because you're describing that people that have made their fortunes in fiat land are blind to this.
Totally.
But the people that have not made their fortunes in fiat land and have made their money producing real goods and services, like they're in touch with reality in a way.
Absolutely.
They get it, right?
They totally, and they've been screwed. Yes. And they're like, you ask them, how's inflation? Economists tell us inflation's going down and everything's going to be, you would get some people who'd be fucking angry. Of course. I mean, if you told my handyman up in Massachusetts, if I said that to him, he'd want to slug me. He's like, you're full of fucking shit. That's absolute crap. Yeah. Because he's a mediator. Yeah. And he sees the prices. Yeah. Right. It's just not. It's not working.
Yeah. It is bullshit. Right. It's the word. It just doesn't make sense. It's like what?
Well, they're gaslighting us. Really, is what they're doing. Exactly. I mean, they're gaslighting us. Yes. Yeah. And so, we got to fight back as best we can. Yeah. And we can do that in the political arena. It's hard because the choices aren't all somewhat flawed, but they're better. They're better choices than worse. I'm not going to go there because I don't like being in that area. But you can really do it with your savings. Yes. I mean, that's it's. I think you used the term earlier. In the gold world, you can say, I opt out. Yeah. You want me to put my money in your bank? Fuck you. I'm buying gold. Right. And Bitcoin is just a better form of gold, really. I mean, I look at it, Bitcoin is digital gold, and gold is analog sound money. Bitcoin is digital sound money.
Yeah.
We're transitioning to a digital world. Bitcoin's vastly superior.
Bingo.
But if you're not comfortable with Bitcoin, please buy some gold.
Yes.
Because it's not going down in value. And
Right.
it will protect your purchasing power.
Right.
You know?
And this is another useful definition of money, right? Is that I think it's the voting system that has the highest signal, right?
Yes.
So when you buy a car, you're signaling to the economy to produce more cars.
Right.
If you sell a house, you're signaling to the economy to produce less houses.
Right.
And if you move your purchasing power out of the system, right? So you're
Right.
selling fiat currency to buy physical gold or to buy Bitcoin, you're actually hitting the government and the central bank where it hurts, which is their
Absolutely.
wallet.
And
And
that's
that's
what
the vote that carries.
And that's what I
signal.
don't think people fully understand is that this is a really great protest vote.
Yes.
You know, I mean, the GameStop people. Have you watched the movie Dumb Money? It's if you
I haven't seen it yet. No.
you should watch it because you know they had them cornered, and Ken Griffin got them to change the rules, just as they changed the rules with me on the
Right.
short selling of financial stocks
Yeah.
in 2008. And it's part of the reason why I'm so bitter about the Fed. I just
Yeah.
hate the fucking Fed.
Yeah.
They've really damaged my family. But you know, those guys were trying to send a signal to the broken Wall Street system. Hey, you can't create more shares than exist because if you do, we're going to short squeeze you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the Wall Street system fought back and changed the rules and they fucked them.
Changing the rules.
Changing the rules, right? You can't change the rules in Bitcoin.
That's the
If
key.
we want to starve this beast,
Yes.
if we want to see this government collapse, okay?
Yes.
All we need is $1 million Bitcoin price.
Yes.
And everybody and their brother saying, I'm not savings in banks anymore. I'm using Bitcoin as an alternative.
Yeah.
The whole thing will come unglued.
Yeah. You're touching on a point I also emphasize a lot on this show that the power to change the rules is the power to win in perpetuity, right? You can never lose if you can change the
That's
rules.
right. Yeah.
Which is exactly what you said the Fed has done, what the governments continue to do, what Wall Street even does.
It's heads I win, tails you lose.
Yeah. And so, and another way to put this, there's the old saying that sovereign is he who decides the exception. So anyone that can decide the exception to the rule set is sovereign over those who have to abide by the rules.
Yeah, exactly.
So what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is a rule set that no one can make an exception to. Correct. Therefore, all the people that play inside of that network are individually sovereign.
Correct.
And that is what's so important about this
And
innovation.
as Jason Lowry says, you've got wealth that no army can take away from you. I mean, absent torturing you for your 12 words. I mean, you think about, how did militaries get built up? They got built up to basically steal wealth and land, to plunder.
Of course.
Guys are like, hey, we want those guys' land, we want their money.
Yeah.
Let's get some sort, let's go conquer it.
Yeah.
Right? And that's really the story of human warfare. And here you are, you have a piece of property that's digital that exists in somebody's head with 12 words that, absent torturing you, nobody can steal. I mean, you can't. It doesn't matter how many warheads you have.
Exactly.
I mean, they can. Absent suiciding you, more or less.
Yeah.
You're secure.
Yeah, and even the torturing can be secured against through multi-sig and multi-key
Well, that's
solutions.
exactly right. I mean, that's what I've done. It's okay, fine. I can't give it to you if I want to.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank my friends at Swan Bitcoin for their long-standing support of the What is Money show. Swan's mission is to help millions of people get into Bitcoin, so they built the best solution to set up recurring Bitcoin buys and automatic withdrawals into cold storage. With the Swan app, it takes just 2 minutes to sign up and start buying Bitcoin. If you're a new customer, you get $10 in free Bitcoin for signing up, and the first $10,000 of Bitcoin you buy incurs 0 fees. If you're an existing Swan customer, then the next $10,000 of Bitcoin you buy now incurs 0 fees. So if you love to recommend Bitcoin to friends and family, then Swan is the best place to start. So go to swanbitcoin.com/breedlove to get started today. Again, that's swanbitcoin.com/breedlove. Are you sick of being robbed by politicians through inflation and endless money printing? If so, you need to be at Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville, Tennessee on July 25th through 27th. As the largest Bitcoin and Fintech conference in the world, Bitcoin 2024 stands as a beacon of monetary freedom, a glimmer of hope amongst a darkening macroeconomic backdrop. Top speakers, companies, and thought leaders from across the industry will convene in Nashville to look ahead to the next year
and beyond. I will be there, and Bitcoin conferences like this have become my favorite place to socialize since becoming a Bitcoiner. Ticket prices will increase soon. Get your tickets now and secure your spot at this game-changing event. So go to b.tc/conference and use discount code Breedlove to sign up for the Bitcoin 2024 conference. Again, that's b.tc/conference, discount code Breedlove.
Okay, so consumer confidence is at least partially collapsing in the U.S. dollar, hence the price of gold is at new all-time highs.
Right.
Costco is selling a lot of gold, as we just talked about. And we recently passed the 91-year anniversary of Executive Order 6102,
Right.
in which private gold ownership was outlawed in the United States.
Correct.
This is during the Great Depression, basically, right?
Yeah.
I guess maybe what are your views on Executive Order 6102? Like, why did that happen? Why did the government outlaw private gold ownership?
Yeah.
And do you think we will see a similar executive order on gold or Bitcoin if the US dollar continues to fail or continues to inflate, or if the US goes into a severe economic depression?
Fabulous questions. And I've thought of these and answered these a lot. So let's go back to why Roosevelt did what he did, okay? We were in the Depression. It was 1933. A bunch of banks had just failed. We'd had enormous deflation. I mean enormous, like there's never been an event like it. Housing prices had collapsed 80%, 90%. All these banks, there was just not enough money in the system, even though they were trying to print money and push it out. Mm-hmm. Unemployment was 30%. And they knew that, and by the way, they were on the gold standard. A dollar could be exchanged for a $20 gold coin. You could go into a bank and back and forth. And they knew that they needed to get out of this deflationary environment, and they knew that they were going to need to inflate, and they knew that to do so, they had to push up the price of gold. Mm-hmm. And so what Roosevelt did was he realized, and this is, frankly, it's criminal behavior, and my grandfather hated him for it. He said, turn in your gold or $10,000 fine and jail. And by the way, there was a lot of non-compliance, even back then. It was a much more compliant country that believed in the government, but still a lot of people said, screw you, I'm not doing that. But many people did. And of course, soon after he turned it in, he revalued it from the $20.67 to $35. And so it was a 70% devaluation of the dollar in gold terms, and then went back on the gold standard, but made it illegal for Americans to own it. And so it was really a way of reinflating the currency and getting out of the deflationary event that had occurred. And by the way, that event occurred because of Federal Reserve violating their charter. And Federal Reserve was formed in 1913. 3 years later, World War II broke out. Right. They immediately violated their charter and printed money to help finance the war. And then they kept going, and they held interest rates artificially low, which is what created the bubble in 29. And Bernanke, who's a scholar of the Depression, said, well, the mistake there was we didn't print enough money after the bubble burst. No, the mistake was they held interest rates artificially low to create the bubble to begin with. Right. And by the way, that greatly damaged my grandfather and his wife, who had a business, and they'd expanded it in 27 and taken on debt to expand it. And they were getting the wrong signals. The signal was, hey, the economy's on fire. You got to grow your business. Right. And of course, the economy wasn't on fire. The economy was hyperinflating, or based on fake signals. But anyway, so that they did it to get out of a deflationary trap. Right. And then they figured letting citizens own this is too dangerous. We want to have control of this gold, not let citizens have control of the gold. So you now can't own it. By the way, in that decade, the gold mining stocks went up 10x because it was the only way for U.S. citizens to participate in gold. Right. Okay, let's roll it forward, because here we are, and this is a controversial topic. Okay, and I've had people at very high places in the Bitcoin world, others say to me, let's not push the hyperinflation narrative. And the reason to not push the hyperinflation is scary. And we don't want to terrify people, and we want to be positive about Bitcoin and positive about where it goes. And, you know, because way back when on Twitter a couple of years ago, I would always post the hyperinflation chart of the day.
Right.
But, you know, not being a doomster, let's just be realistic. One of the possible outcomes of the monetary trap we're in is that we have hyperinflation. You just can't deny that. Now,
Of course.
I don't know if it's
that's probably the most likely
it
outcome.
could be.
Given
I
history.
don't even go there, but there's some probability it occurs.
Sure.
In a best case scenario, we will have high inflation and transition to sound money, and that's what I'm rooting for. Okay,
Right.
because hyperinflation hurts a lot of people. I don't want to see that happen.
Yeah.
But to pretend like it can't happen, I think that's naive too. You're sticking
course.
your head in the ground.
Of course.
Okay, let's move to the government. We know they lie to us. We know they protect themselves. We know they do whatever they can to keep their scheme going.
Yes.
I can foresee, and this is why I think it's so important for everybody to self-custody and to not be in the ETFs.
Yeah.
I can foresee a time in the future where, quote unquote, the dollar is failing. They're printing a lot of money. There's yield curve control. Inflation's running 15 or 20% a year. Bitcoin is at 150,000 going to 300. Gold is at 3,000 going to 5,000. And somebody down there in DC is going to say, you know what? These sound money guys, they're killing this dollar. They're killing, and this is damaging. This is a matter of friggin' national security. We got to save the dollar. And just like they sold war bonds to finance World War II, it'll become a crusade. You know, sound money people are evil. We have this great Keynesian system going on, and they're effing it up. So, you know, we've got a solution to that. We need to tax gold capital gains at 90%, tax Bitcoin capital gains at 90%, and maybe make them turn in the gold. Of course, no one owns gold anymore. So, and it would be, you know, all the armed people that are buying at Costco, they're not turning in their gold. I can assure you of that. It's over their dead body. But, you know, and they might say, by the way, and we're going to grab all the Bitcoin. And you know, there's some who think very conspiratorially it's possible that they let these ETFs go through with the idea that we would much rather have this in a system that we can control and call in than have everybody be a hodler with their own self-custody solution.
Right.
Because if they do decide to do a 6102 on Bitcoin,
Less throats to choke.
it's pretty easy. You know, they call up Fidelity, they call up BlackRock, they call up all the major, and they say, guys, it's all over. You know, give them cash, send the Bitcoin to us.
Yeah.
You know, it's illegal to own Bitcoin in the United States.
Yeah.
You know, what are the odds of that potential outcome? They're not zero.
Right.
I mean, you know, I don't know if they're 50%. I don't know how to handicap that. I'd probably say maybe today my best guess is that'd be a 30% shot.
Yeah.
I hope that we've shoved these problems out far enough and there are enough Bitcoiners and enough support for sound money and enough knowledge that their system just dies without them having that last grasp at our throats.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? That's what I hope.
Right. Yeah.
That we move to our standard without them trying to do that. But, you know, that might be a naive wish on my part.
Sure.
You know, they might try to do that. And so, as you well know, but the audience should hear, you know, this is why there is a risk, you know, and this is why we hardcore maxi Bitcoiners say, not your keys, not your coins.
Yeah.
And, you know, so if you have your coins, you know, on an ETF at, you know, who's custodying at Coinbase, you know, they could come to you and say, you know, sorry guys, here's, you know, we'll give you cash.
Yeah.
We recognize they're worth 200 grand a piece. Fine. We're not going to steal them from you. We're going to give you today's cash value.
Right.
But you're going to give those coins back to the government.
All right.
And guys like me, you know, if they go that route and they decide they're going to basically steal the fruits of my 66 years of labor, my response is going to be, you know, Mola Bay, motherfucker.
Yeah.
You know, come and get it.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
I'm on a boat to Italy.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've got my 12 words. And, you know, unless Italy goes along. And if Italy decides not to go along, fine. I'm on a boat to El Salvador.
Right.
You know, I'm going to live someplace where my property rights are respected.
Amen to that.
You know, and I think all hardcore Bitcoiners feel the same way.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm no longer a U.S. citizen.
Yeah. It's at that point, the United States will have sort of undermined its founding ethos, right?
Well,
I mean,
right.
not that we haven't done it before, again with 6102, but
Right.
if it happens again, it's like, what the fuck are we doing here? If you can't have property,
Well, that's
then what's the
right. And
point?
what I hope happens, Rob, is I hope that we transition in the right direction. You know, it doesn't happen so quickly that it forces them into that.
Yeah.
Bitcoiners become more rich and powerful. I mean, like I said this, in another podcast, post Madeira. I could see Saylor being president someday.
Yeah,
and I actually think that'd be a really good thing.
That'd be a huge win.
I mean, I think. I mean, I would trust any Bitcoiner in high office over the people we have there today.
Yes.
Anyone. It doesn't matter. Even the guys I don't like.
Right. Sort of leveraging the decentralized remnants we have from the constitutional republic the United States was founded as.
Yep.
We can leverage that by getting Bitcoiners into positions of power to make this transition a bit more smooth. It doesn't have to be so...
It doesn't have to be a bad thing.
Right.
It doesn't have to
be... It could really be an amazing thing and get us back to the founding principles of what we were.
Absolutely. I mean... First of all, I'm incredibly optimistic on what the world looks like on the other side of this monetary mess.
Yes.
Incredibly optimistic for my kids. I mean, because human beings are smart and they work hard and we do the right shit, most of us all the time, and it's gonna get better.
Yeah.
But it's like, look, my grandfather's generation had to deal with World War II. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right.
Our generation has got to deal with this broken monetary system. Yeah. And we got to fucking fix it.
Yeah.
We just got to. That's I mean, I say our generation. I mean, the younger generation today. I mean, I'm kind of at the tail end of it. But this is the in my opinion, this is why your show is so important. This is the story for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And it could be 30 years. I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think, fourth turnings, which this one I think kicked off in 08, they tend to last 10 to 20 years.
Yeah.
20 years to 08 is 2028.
Yeah. Feels
about right to me with the size of the contractions and the rapidity of the contractions. Mm-hmm. This is going to come to a head. I mean, looking at this U.S. federal balance sheet and the U.S. federal income statement, this shit's happening now.
Yeah.
I mean, they just reported last night, Q2 ended March, U.S. federal deficit was $600 billion. Mm-hmm. Q1 ended December, U.S. deficit was $500 trillion. Mm-hmm. Okay. Last 100 days, they printed $1 trillion. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's a $3.65 trillion deficit or debt growth run rate. I mean, it's fucking
staggering.
It's nuts. It's coming.
And so that you're increasing debt at 100% roughly of revenue per year, and clearly that's not sustainable.
It's just not. Yeah, something's got to give.
Can we lean into something you so clearly this is a massive macro historical change, right?
Yeah,
the fact
big
because
time.
there would have never been a pathway out of this problem absent Bitcoin,
correct?
Right? Because
or as good a pathway. Gold would have helped, but it wouldn't have been perfect because of the paper.
Yeah, exactly.
And because you can't verify it.
Exactly. Yeah. So the thing with gold, and like as great as gold has been as money, and it does work if to the extent you can trust humans to honor the gold standard. The problem has always been the human in the loop, right?
Correct.
So gold being physical doesn't work great as a globalized currency because it's hard to
move it around and verify it.
Exactly. So what do we have to do? We centralize the custody of gold. We abstract it into currency and electronic.
Paper, and it breaks. Yeah.
And then the human in the middle, you have to trust the custodian.
I mean, it works for you and me. I mean, if I have a coin and you want $2,000,
maybe
that works.
But earlier we said no man's better than his incentives. And when I look at it, I'm seeing like, okay, you just can't trust humans to manage this thing. So you can't give that, and you can't, maybe there's a group of people or individuals you could trust.
Okay.
But once you put all that gold in one place, eventually, just like politics, someone's going to come to power. At a
system-wide level, you're right. At a system-wide level. I'm saying coins are pretty easy to verify. And
yes. So again, it's back to that core theme of no man's better than his incentives.
Yeah.
The problem with gold is when you put it in one place, that becomes almost the closest thing to absolute power that there is, right?
Absolutely.
If you can control the money, what's the famous Rothschild's quote?
I don't care who makes the laws. Yeah.
Give me the power to issue a nation's currency. I care not who makes its laws. So Bitcoin is this major disruptive event in an otherwise somewhat hopeless situation, perhaps. Now, when we were talking offline, you were describing this, Bitcoin as an innovation as something comparable to the printing press, perhaps, right? That like prior to the Gutenberg printing press, very few people were literate.
Correct.
Very few people had the skill of numeracy, for instance. Then after the printing press, the cost of books collapses. Literacy becomes much more widespread. Numeracy becomes much more widespread, and we get all of these.
You got libraries and
libraries, the Enlightenment, the scientific revolution, the Industrial Revolution. Like we had this cascading effects that followed really this human cognitive software update
Right.
that resulted from cheaper books, basically.
Right.
So, and then you also mentioned like things like the automobile, right? Like who knew when the automobile was invented that it would lead to, freeways in the cities and all of and things like the airplane, right? That changed the world. So how do you look at Bitcoin in this sequence of innovations that are so earth-shattering that it's almost like before the automobile, after the automobile, before the printing press, after the printing press?
Yeah.
How do you look at the world before Bitcoin versus after Bitcoin?
An innovation on the same scale, maybe higher, maybe lower. You can argue about that. It doesn't really matter. I mean, the one I like to use, and we talked about this before offline, I like to use the example of Microsoft, right? I was fortunate enough, my business school roommate was college roommates with Steve Ballmer. And I'll recall very clearly walking along the Charles River in '83 and Ballmer saying, Larry, this thing is the core of the computing operation of a PC. The PC had just come out a couple of years ago. And every house is going to have 2 or 3 PCs. Everyone's going to need this thing, and it's a monopoly. And this company's going to be worth billions of dollars. We're going to sell millions and millions of copies of it. It's going to be worth billions of dollars. And I was kind of like, God, this guy's nuts. But I could kind of see the vision. And, in '86, when it came public at 14 times trailing and growing 40% a year, I bought some. And I made the wrong mistake. I sold it in 3 years to buy a condo. I had to 3x my money, and I sold it, which was wrong. I should have hung on to some of it at least. But he was right, and that was 40 years ago now. Okay, 83 to today, so almost perfect 40 years. And he was right, and it was because the microchip and the PC, continued to develop and really did enhance and improve people's lives, and it was a true technological innovation. It started off just as a word processor and Lotus 1-2-3. Now we know all the things it can do. The internet comes along and connects everybody, and before that it was Novell, and you had internet connectivity at an office level. But the notion you could send email around the world, kind of obsoleting the post offices in a way, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Here you've got a form of digital money that obsoletes the old kind of money,
Right.
and I don't think we can really see what the implications are. But it's pretty clear to me that in the longer, because it's perfect money, because it can't be diluted, because it takes the power of the printing press away from these evil government actors, because it's verifiable, triple entry, and all the things we've discussed, because it can settle in 10 minutes, it's pretty clear to me that, in our lifetime, my lifetime, certainly my kids' lifetime, we are going to be on a SAT standard, that we are going to pay for things in SATs, that, a steak will cost X sats and gasoline costs Y sats. And I don't know where the dollar is in that world. And I know Saylor doesn't like to talk about this because I don't think he wants to assail the dollar because he figures, why go pick a fight with the U.S. government?
Right.
But I think he's smart enough to know, and I'm sure in his core beliefs, he knows that this is where it's going to go. I mean, this is going to be money. This is going to be the only form of money. Everyone's going to use it.
Yeah.
Now, to get there, you've got to move, and I talked about this with some guys yesterday, you've got to move from its store of value properties, which is really the primary use case today, right? It's a great way to save, to its medium of exchange use case, which, frankly, it's clunky today. Lightning is clunky. We need to do a lot of work on the medium, on layer 2 and the medium of exchange use case. But we will. We will. I mean, I was involved in investing in the internet in '93, and when it first came out, I was putting a phone into a modem and hearing, and 1200 baud, and it was slow as shit, and it was a green screen. Later, I had Windows, I had a graphic user interface, I had broadband. I mean, it was on its way to becoming what the internet is today. So I've seen this model. It was the same thing too. It was networking. The more people were on it, the more valuable it got. Which was what led to Amazon, which is what led to Google, which is what led to Facebook, and all these networked models that benefit from Metcalfe's law.
Right.
So this is the same thing. And I'm not going to fuck it up this time. I mean, I fucked it up that time because I didn't invest in Amazon and Facebook and Google because they weren't making any money. And I was a traditionally trained investor, and I wanted to buy things that made money. I had a value bent.
Right.
And what I didn't realize is the value that can be created through Metcalfe's law. The other thing is they were somewhat deceptive businesses because, Jeff Bezos is where he is today because he had zero cost of capital.
Right.
Because we had ZERP.
Right, of course.
And so, in regular world land, if you had a company that wasn't earning a profit, you couldn't raise money.
Right.
But he was able to raise money, and it didn't matter because money was free.
Right.
So, kind of a funny story there, but I mean, look, Bill Miller got it and he made a fortune in buying Amazon stock, and I missed it, and I'm pissed at myself.
Yeah.
I'm not going to miss it this time. I'm not going to miss it.
That's a great point, actually. So there was a part of Bezos' success with Amazon was state interference, right? In the form
fiat-based.
in the form of zero interest rate policies, or as you said, also because early days Amazon, they circumvented sales tax, right? If you were buying stuff online, you just had to pay sales tax.
Although I'm not sure people were really using it for that reason.
No, but it made it more pricing competitive.
Helped. Yeah, it helped.
Right?
It definitely helped.
Yeah. And so, you establish really strong network effects, and then they just start with books, start selling everything.
And then you got volume, you got buying power, and you're Walmart on the internet.
Yeah.
Walmart on the internet.
Yeah. So what do you, again, I know it's probably almost an impossible question to ask, but is there anything, if you look around the corner of where Bitcoin takes us, like you mentioned offline the dissolution of nation states, like what types of radical earth-shattering events do you expect post-Bitcoin?
I do. I think we are in an age of decentralization. Mm-hmm. And these nation states don't serve us anymore. Mm-hmm. This revolution is going to allow us all to rethink what is the role of government. Why do we need governments at all? Mm-hmm. They consume in the world. They generally consume half of the productive capacity. That's fucking insane.
Right.
When I go back to core principles and I think about governments, and I'm not an anarchist. And there's some people who think, well, we need no government. I don't go there. My personal belief is that what government should be is a fair referee.
Yeah.
I want to have somebody who will pay cops and pay courts and pay judges to keep the rules fair and throw the bad guys in jail. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a role for governments to do that, and arguably to protect you from evil actors. But to be honest with you, I think if you look around the world, and some people are convinced there are tons of evil actors at the government level. I'm less convinced. I think we could actually make wars and nuclear weapons and all of that a thing of the past. Because I don't think the average man wants to kill other people.
Sure.
I think 98% of this planet are not psychopaths, and they don't want to kill people.
Right.
They just want to live peacefully and raise their family and do the best they can.
Yeah.
And so, therefore it begs the question of why do we need an enormous national scale government?
Right.
One could provide police and courts at a local level or at a state level, or at a smaller regional level, and it seems I predict that 50 years from now the United States might not be the United States. There might be a lot of different little places around the United States, and each one and people will self-select. If you're really liberal and you want to live with a bunch of crazy liberals, well, fine. You can live in the Northern California district. And do whatever you want. And, right? And if you're full of all, you don't believe in any of that shit, and you want to just live free or die, you're in Texas or wherever you are.
Right.
It's but who knows? Who knows how we get from here to there? And there are a lot of people who believe that in the fourth turning terms, we've got to go through some mega war. This Thucydides trap that we're going to have a mega war to get to the other side of it. I'm not so sure. I think our biggest competitors are China and Russia, and I don't really think they want to kill people either. I know people will disagree with that, particularly with respect to Russia. Look, Putin's probably killed a lot of his political opponents, but I thought it was really brilliant. Remember when back in Britain in the day when he poisoned some guy? There was some spy who got out and he was in Britain, and Putin killed him.
Yeah, and he recently apparently killed one of his political opponents.
Well, the guy, the jet, he shot down. Yeah, and he does that shit. Okay, fine. Yeah. But they went and they questioned him on the guy in Britain, and the Western journalist questioned him. He said, look, what do you guys think? You think I'm naive? Tell me what happened in November, of 1963 in Dallas. Mm-hmm. What the fuck?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This is the way shit runs.
Yeah. Of course.
And I think, I hope and I pray that enough of mankind is aware of the danger of a full-fledged nuclear exchange that we're not going to get there, and we're not going to go there. That that won't happen.
This is one of the most exciting prospects of Bitcoin. Is the idea of making government local again.
Yeah.
Right. It's the centralization problem that really seems to be the big problem.
Right.
You have. I mean, just in the U.S., right? We have the U.S. president
Right.
that governs over 330 million U.S. citizens.
Right.
And I just don't think that math works, right? One ape to rule 330 million apes doesn't make any sense to me.
Right.
You know, if you need governance and protection and police and courts, that should be kind of a localized affair.
Right.
And I you know, this gets to the deeper point, obviously, in the book, The Sovereign Individual, and something you alluded to earlier, that the shape of social organization tends to reflect the shape of our information technologies.
Yes.
So that the invention of the microprocessor, as you mentioned earlier, enabling peer-to-peer communication, as we're engaging in right now, right, via the internet, this is the revolution, that ideas move in a different way, and then our societies come to reflect how our ideas move.
And we don't need the New York Times to tell us what we think.
Exactly, right.
You know, we don't need Fox News to tell us what we think.
Right.
We can all decide for ourselves.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think we can all, I mean, I think we can generally speak, I think, and with respect to this whole law and order thing, my guess is we could provide the policing and the courts and the law and order things we need for maybe 10% of our income.
Yeah.
And I would gladly pay that 10%.
Yeah.
You know, just a flat tax all the way across. Everyone pays 10%.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and that's what keeps the system, you know, safe and running. And frankly, you know, everyone's responsible for their own retirement.
Yeah.
You know, the giant Ponzi scheme that we call Social Security,
Right.
where you don't get back what you pay in.
Yeah.
You know, we eliminate all of that.
Yeah.
You know, and one of the things that would do, which would be a beautiful thing, is it would put retirement back on the burden of people's kids, and then people would want to have kids in a family. Because that, I mean, pre-Social Security, pre all these social programs, how did you protect against being in trouble when you were old?
Saved.
Well, one, you saved,
and your family,
but two, you
of
had a
course.
lot of kids.
Yeah. And those go hand in hand, right? The
Right.
more you can save, the more kids you can have.
Right.
Yeah.
And because you knew the kids weren't going to let you starve.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was a good deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how intertwined the economics and the culture is, right? When you destroy savings.
Well, and this whole trend now, I've heard this DINK thing, this whole dual income, no kids, or the world's so bad and so expensive, I don't want to have kids. I mean, what the fuck?
Yeah.
That's just so perverse.
It's a meaningless life.
I mean, exactly. I mean, it's, you know, to me, you know, people measure wealth in lots of ways. I measure it in years left.
Yeah.
That's probably the greatest form of wealth. I mean, Buffett would trade $50 billion for another 50 years.
Sure.
He hasn't got it, right? And then I measure it in terms of, you know, interaction with people and you know, your day-to-day life. I mean, who you get to hang out with, what you get to do, what your time is, and, you know, freedom to do the things that you think are important and meaningful. I mean, that's wealth.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's dollars and there's other shit, but and there are people with tons of dollars that don't have wealth.
Right.
And there are tons of people. There are people who have wealth that don't have tons of dollars.
Yes.
You know, they're not necessarily coinciding.
One of my favorite sayings about money is that some people are so poor, all they have is money.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. I was just in El Salvador, and I saw, and it was so sweet. I saw these people in the airport flying back, and it was very, and they had signs and stuff, and it was very clear they were sending off like a teenager, probably their first airplane ride, their first trip overseas, and they were taking tons of photos. The whole family was there, and I just thought, isn't that sweet? Do you know what I mean? That this is such a big deal for these people that they probably saved hard to get the money to send this kid to school or for some reason to go someplace else. You know, and you know, in their eyes, they're wealthy, and by our eyes, we probably wouldn't count them wealthy. Right?
It's beautiful. The whole people being able to make progress, right? That's what feels best in your life. That's what we like to see. We love to see a comeback story. We love to see people picking themselves up by the bootstraps. Success stories. So savings, I mean, that's what generally enables that for most people.
Exactly.
And so I mean, we say this, right? This is a mantra in Bitcoin. Fix the money, fix the world.
Yeah.
And hopefully a lot of what we've talked about today has highlighted what that really means, right? It's a very short phrase, but man, you can unpack it for hours and hours and hours and hours. I guess if you are trying to unpack that phrase for someone that is not a Bitcoiner or a gold bug, how do you explain in a very palatable, accessible, understandable way the damage that central banking is doing to the world and how Bitcoin fixes that?
Yeah, great question, and I've struggled with this a lot, and it's very hard. But I usually, I usually just start with the basic inflation equation and inflation question. And I just say, if you knew that everything you earned wasn't going to be inflated away, and if you knew you could save solidly and that savings would hold its value, how wouldn't your life be different? How would you feel different and better if you knew that as you got more productive and you figured out how to do more things, you were going to earn a greater income, but all the things you wanted cost the same price because there was no inflation? Wouldn't that be a much better world for you? And I think most people can think that through, and they go, "Yeah, I get that. That would be true." And I say, "Okay, well, that applies at scale."
Right.
Right?
Right.
It's not just you, it's everybody. And the fact that you can't do that is because some people have perverted the system to their benefit. And the other chart I tend to show, so that's the carrot is, look, your life would be better if money were sound. And most people get that. They understand. Then I say, let me tell you something. There's some people whose lives are a lot better. They're called quintillionaires, okay? And they're better because they've got a system set up that benefits them at your expense and at the expense of everybody else. I mean, I like to say, think of what's happened since in the early 70s when the microchip got invented. Think of the progress we've had. I mean, just, it's friggin' stunning. I mean, we've got these computers in our pockets. We can call anybody. It costs, I saw all of that take place in my lifetime. It's amazing. We should be if the value of all that had been translated into our lives, we should be working 30-hour work weeks,
right,
and have the rest as leisure.
Right.
And the reason that has not occurred is that the people at the top of the pyramid have sucked off all of that goddamn benefit for themselves.
Right.
And that's why they're worth billions and billions and billions of dollars, and you're still struggling to make ends meet.
Yeah.
And there's several charts that show this, that, the 1% in this world control half of the wealth.
Yeah.
And it's
crazy.
just, and that has only, and by the way, they don't have your best interest at heart. And they want to do things that protect them and that hurt you. And so, we need to stop that. And the way to stop that is to fix the money that prevents their corruption. And their corruption occurs because think about it. Then I go into, okay, if I told you could borrow money at 0% and you could get a 10% rate of return on that money that you had borrowed, how long do you think it would take you to get rich? The answer is not very long.
Right.
Especially if you had the credit ability to borrow a lot of it.
Yeah.
Which, and by the way, not only borrow a lot of it, but know, like Lloyd Blankfein, who ran Goldman Sachs, know that if you failed, the government was going to bail you out.
That's right.
Right?
Right. You can't lose.
It was heads you win, tails the other side loses. You could not lose.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Which is how, Jamie Dimon became a billionaire, because he printed himself tons and tons of stock options when JP Morgan was down in the dumps, when he knew the Fed was going to bail that bank out, send them money, and let it become extremely valuable. And then that bank was able to borrow at 0% and lend it out at 10% and just compound and, wash, rinse, repeat. And so, people say, well, how come I'm struggling so much? And so in a sense, this is a little bit of a class warfare issue. You are struggling so much because the system has been tilted against you.
Yeah.
And these billionaires are robbing you blind. You are paying more for steak and gasoline.
Yeah.
They can afford to pay that too because they've got billions. And they are grabbing the fruits of your labor because they can borrow money cheap and lend it dear.
Yeah.
And you can't do that. You want to borrow money? Sorry, 20% on your credit card, pal.
Right.
You can't get 50 basis points. I hate Elizabeth Warren. I think she's just an evil person. There's one thing she said that I actually agree with. Back when she was talking about the student loan market and the banker bailouts, she said, how come we are charging students 6% on their debt and bankers can borrow at 50 basis points? Fair point.
Yeah.
Right? Students are trying to borrow money to improve their education, to contribute to society. They got to pay 6%.
Yeah.
You're a Wall Street bank.
Right.
Fed will give you money at 50 bips.
Right.
What the fuck?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a broken system. And by the way, it runs through that. Then those banks lobby DC DC passes Citizens United, which says that corporations are people. You know, I mean, and it just goes on and on and on. You know, how do you know it's broken? Our Congress people and representatives show up in Washington, D.C. with modest wealth. They all leave multi-millionaires. You know, I mean, right?
Yeah.
It's blatantly broken.
Yeah. Yeah, it is really bad. And the example I like to throw out there is, you know, we don't let athletes bet on the games that they have the
that they're
ability.
playing in.
Right. So why do we let politicians bet on the industries that they can regulate and influence the outcomes of?
Trading stocks. Yeah, the Nancy Pelosi stock trader. Yeah.
Exactly. So then Nancy Pelosi's on her, whatever it is, few $100,000 a year salary, and her net worth is in the 80 million,
more,
something like that.
Yeah, more.
How? Right? It's like, again, math. Like so many of these things are reducible to math, and you just say, well, the numbers don't add up, right? The United States is insolvent. These politicians are making money somehow beyond what their salary says they're capable of.
So I guess the point, you know, to bring it all around full circle, the point is, the game is rigged. It's rigged against the common man. Yeah. And the only way, I mean, there are a lot of ways to fight back. You can write letters. You can, you know, I mean, you make noise. You can vote. All this stuff. My view is that's not going to get us out of it. What's going to get us out of it is we're going to stop using their money, and we're going to use our money.
Yes.
And then they're going to be forced to use our money, and that's a level playing field.
Yes.
That's where we got to go.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
And just to emphasize that point, when you move, like when you say buy Bitcoin, right? You're selling dollars, and you're buying.
You're selling
Bitcoin.
their money. You're selling their system,
right?
So you're buying an alternative fair system,
right? You're moving actual purchasing power or energy from one system into another. So you're destroying the corrupt system and empowering the incorruptible system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly the way to look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is there's although it's economic, clearly, as we're saying.
Right. I mean, you would like number to go up.
Sure.
Obviously.
But the's a moral, ethical dimension to this whole thing. Yeah.
Much more important.
Yeah. Okay. You're a Christian. You've said that several times during this interview. I think good and evil are kind of this, it's an unavoidable dichotomy that you get to when you explore this rabbit hole of money and how the global financial system works. You kind of arrive at, well, as we said earlier, there's a lie built into the money, and then that becomes manifested as lying economic high priest or lying CPI metrics, et cetera, et cetera. What is... I mean, so it might sound ridiculous until you actually start going into it. Like, there does seem to be a spiritual contention here.
I believe there is. Yeah.
How do you view this through the lens of a God-fearing Christian man? Like, is this, I mean, is the central bank an institution of evil? Like, or is this a struggle between good and evil?
Well, I think it is. I think it is. I don't know if they really even know they're evil, but I think, you know, the Bible talks about honest weights and measures.
Right.
You know, and Jesus threw the money changers out of the temple.
Yeah.
I mean, there's an argument that, you know, and he was opposed to unfair dealing. And I think, you know, I think most human beings, I mean, you even see this in chimps and other primates. I mean, most people want systems that are fair.
Of course.
You know, it's a natural human need, and it's embedded in all the religions.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, love thy neighbor as thyself, and treat others the way you would want to be treated.
Yes.
And I think that, you know, the system as it's constructed doesn't, you know, there's a certain set of people that aren't playing by those rules.
Right.
You know, and yeah, some of us are pissed off, right? I mean, you know, it's cost my family a ton of money, and it's created a lot of hurt in society. It's funded, I mean, we haven't even gotten into how fiat currency funds all these pointless wars.
Right.
And the $6 trillion we incinerated, you know, in the Middle East and Afghanistan in order to try and secure oil. I mean, you know, I mean, Ron Paul made a comment that I love.
And the millions of people we murdered, right? It's a mass murder campaign funded by stolen money.
Yeah, that too. I'm not even mentioning that, which, you know, I mean, the drones, all of it, you know. I mean, you know, what's going on now in you know, Gaza. I mean, it's just, it's horrific. But So what was I going to say? Oh, Ron Paul said, it's not a coincidence in his opinion that the 20th century, 1900 to 2000, was the century of central banking, and it was also a century of warfare.
Total war, yeah.
Yeah, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Korea, all of it.
Yeah.
He thinks and the reason is simple. There's sound logic behind this. So, the government comes to you and says, Rob, we want to go kill people in the Middle East and secure the oil lines. And by the way, if we do that, you're going to have to pay 20% more in tax.
Yeah.
You okay with that?
Yeah.
And you're going to go, fuck no. Yeah, I don't want to pay 20% more in tax, and I don't want to kill people in the Middle East.
Right.
Okay. Well, they don't have the money to do it. Fine. We're going to do it. We're going to run a deficit to do it, and we're just going to finance the deficit by printing the paper instead.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So we're going to get the 20% out of you either way, Rob. You're fucked.
Right.
But instead of coming through the front door and asking you, do you want to vote for it and determine if you want to do it, we're going to do it through the back door. We're going to print the money, and your steak is going to cost 20% more.
Exactly.
That's...
Yeah, instead of getting your consent.
Correct.
Right. They do it without your consent.
Correct.
Which is, it's one thing to rob someone kind of to their face, right? To kind of put the gun in their face and say, give me the money or else. But it's another thing entirely to rob them surreptitiously and then blame, as Joe Biden does, blame the ice cream producers on the price of ice cream going up rather than the Fed. And so there's this, this is why I'm asking about good and evil, because, and I've struggled to put words to this, but there seems to be this metaphysical deterioration that occurs, right? When you make the money a lie, then all of a sudden you've motivated more lying to justify the printing of the money. Yeah. And then the printing of the money is then used to fund the killing, which is then there's more lies to cover up the killing, right? It's some moral crusade or whatever, we need to, we're spreading democracy or whatever the bullshit is. Yeah. And it's like, if no man is better than his incentives, can we unwind this whole metaphysical deterioration by just fixing the socioeconomic fabric by which we're all connected?
I believe we can. I really believe we can. If there's nothing in it for them, to behave in that way, which with sound money there wouldn't be. Yeah. They'll stop behaving that way.
Right. Yeah, in a real practical way, the way I'm viewing it is if you take away the opportunity for stealing,
right?
Well, then all of a sudden the profitability of the killing and the lying and all that, it just goes away.
Right.
So it's there's no reation to kill or lie because I can't steal.
There's no reason to do that.
Yeah.
It's, I heard somebody say, at some point, printing money and running a central bank the way we're doing it, having the wars, it'd be like, people are going to look back at this and say it was barbarian. It was like bloodletting, for medicine in the 1300s or something. What the fuck were you guys thinking?
Yeah. The economic dark ages.
Yeah, it was just ridiculous. Yeah. You guys weren't enlightened at all whatsoever.
Yeah. The best is that, I think it's a New Zealand central banker where he says, central banking is a great business to be in. We print money and people believe it.
Oh, did he say that?
Yeah, said that. Said it out loud.
That's rather honest.
It's on my pinned tweet. We did a 3-minute.
I'll have to take a look at that.
Synopsis of people talking about money recently, and that's in there. But yeah,
wow.
He said the quiet part out loud.
He did say the quiet part. Well, that's kind of shocking, actually.
Yeah. What does God mean to you then, in the scope of all this struggle of good and evil?
Well, I don't know. I just look, as you get, I'm 66, you're much younger than I am. You get to a certain point in your life and you start kind of thinking, well, what have I accomplished? What have I done? What am I here for, et cetera? And, because none of us live forever, right?
Yeah.
And so, part of the reason why I do all of this is just that I feel like I'm well positioned to do it because I've been in this game. I was a sound money advocate before Bitcoin ever came along. I'm very knowledgeable about this stuff because it was, I was in the investment business and stuff. So I feel like I have a certain, historical context that I can bring that might be helpful to people. And so therefore I'm going to do it.
And you do.
And maybe, maybe there's some ego involved as well. I don't mind the attention, but I hope it's not just for that. I don't think it's just for that. I want my legacy to be, the guy was on the right side of this shit and tried to make things better as best he could. Do you know what I mean? And so so at the end of it all, I can look back and say, well, I did do that. and my kids and grandkids can kind of be proud of, that old fart, he knew what the fuck he was doing, right? I'm glad he bought those coins.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, it's really kind of that simple. I mean, and God knows I'm far from perfect. I'm very, very flawed in lots and lots of ways. And I know that.
Yeah.
I pray for guidance and I pray for salvation. I mean, no guarantees. I mean, I've done some shitty stuff in my life. So, but it is what it is. You just keep going, and you're realizing that you're flawed. You do the best you can.
That's well said. I appreciate the emphasis on action.
Yeah.
It's obviously the talk matters and we need to communicate about what's going on. But at the end of the day, it's like, what did you actually do
well,
about it?
Well, that's right. And and God knows, I mean, one thing I have been, one of my favorite poems is the Teddy Roosevelt poem about the man in the ring. And I mean, I failed at lots of shit and I've gotten the shit kicked out of me. I mean, I was long gold stocks in 2013 and I just got my ass handed to me. I mean, it was so humiliating. I lost half my net worth and blah, blah, blah. But I'm determined that, I think I got this right. Okay. I think I got the sound money thing right. And I'm sticking with my story. I'm going down with the ship. I mean, if it turns out sound money's not going to save the world, if it turns out Bitcoin and gold aren't going to matter, if it turns out the Keynesians are going to win, fine. They fucking won. I ain't changing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I'm pretty sure I'm on the right side of this.
Yeah.
I'm like 95% sure I'm on the right side of this. But, I should probably be more humble. I may not be. I don't know.
Well, I mean, you've got the battle scars to prove it, and you've been around for a long time, and it sounds like sound money's been a central pillar to
It has. I've felt strongly about it for quite some time.
Yeah. And the market's proven you right so far.
Kind of. I mean, we're not at the end point. And
Sure.
I mean, one thing I've definitely come to respect is how good the other side is and how good they are at kicking the can, how much they can stretch it out.
Yeah.
I mean, I have friends who say, Larry, you're probably right, but it might be 30 or 40 years. Well, I haven't got that much time.
Yeah.
I hope it's not that long.
Yeah, it is. It's complicated, right? Because as new technologies come online and we expand productivity, that gives them the runway to kick the can even further.
Maybe.
Right. Well, because people aren't feeling the pain as much.
Yeah,
right?
maybe. But it also gives us more tools.
Sure.
In terms of knowledge and this generation is the hero generation in the fourth turning archetype, and they're getting screwed. I mean, my kids are all in their 20s, they're all doing great.
Yeah.
They're like, hey, Dad, how the hell am I going to buy a house on this salary?
Sure.
They can't do it.
Yeah.
And so they all know it's very badly broken, that generation. Right?
Yeah.
And so they're gonna fight to change it, and that's good.
Yeah.
It's really good.
So they are good recruits for the fix the money, fix the world mission.
Oh yeah,
then.
well they're all Bitcoiners. That's I mean, big time. They're all in.
Well, that is a great legacy, if nothing else.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Larry, thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, thank you. I always enjoy talking to you. I told you before, you're one of my favorite podcasters.
Oh, thank
it's
you.
an honor to be here. It really is.
Honor to have you, man. You're one of my favorite guests.
Oh, thanks.
We got to do this more often. Now we're practically neighbors.
I was going to say we're neighbors in the wintertime. In the summertime, I'm up north. But in any time from, I don't know, December-ish to May, I'm in Naples.
Okay. Open invitation.
Okay.
Anytime down here.
Well, next year we'll do it again.
Let's do it. Where can people find you on the internet?
So on the internet, two things. One, I'm on Twitter where I make a lot of noise, mostly yelling at central bankers at Lawrence Lepard. And I pull no punches. And then on the internet, it's www.ema2.com, Edward Mark Alpha, the number 2.com, which is the firm I manage is Equity Management Associates. We've got two funds, one that's kind of more gold focused, one that's more Bitcoin focused. And we do a quarterly letter, which is free. We'll never spam you. If you just go put your email in there, you'll get a copy of that. It's a macro letter. We're kind of talking about, we review the events in that quarter that happened in the sound money world.
Awesome.
So that's, some people find it helpful.
Beautiful. We'll link to all of that in the show notes.
Okay.
Thank you again for doing this.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.